Sonic Robo Blast 2 as a single-player experience is an excellent game. It's got wonderful level design, tight controls, classic Genesis physics masterfully translated into 3D, and a large amount of secrets and fun post-game content. It's also got an extensive multiplayer mode offering both a cooperative campaign and tons of fun competitive modes. Simply downloading this game and then playing it, you've already got a very fun time on your hands. But of course, this isn't the end. Since the final demo series, the game has been known for its extensive modding capabilities and a large scene that has emerged thanks to these features. The SRB2 community is chock full of talented people who have taken this humble game far beyond the realms of what you'd think would be possible through the creation of numerous different types of modifications. Of course, there's tons of mods out there which can completely transform the game and create totally new experiences, such as the ever-popular Sonic Robo Blast 2 kart mod, whose popularity has transcended its origins. But many SRB2 mods also seek to add content and augment the base game with new characters, multiplayer modes, and of course, new maps. After all, what better way to expand the life of a game than by creating new stages? The idea has led to the creation of numerous custom level packs, as well as individual levels that have achieved a good amount of notoriety in the community, as well as spawning the event that this video is going to focus on, the SRB2 Original Level Design Collab. Beginning in 2003, the OLDC has been going on for over 20 years and is SRB2's premier way of demonstrating the talents of the community in level design and construction. During the contest duration, users are allowed to submit maps that fall under one of four categories: single player, which is self-explanatory, circuit, which are used for the race mode, and match and capture the flag, which are designed for the ring slinger modes of the same name. Once all the submissions are compiled, they're released into one or two add-on files, which are mod files that the player can download into the game, letting him play the levels and vote for them. Forum posts are also created, allowing users to list out and vote their favorites. Once votes are compiled, the maps are given a certain amount of points based on how many votes they received, and the maps with the most points are declared the winner of that division. Winning maps creators are given a special user title and their maps are highlighted on the forums. The current format for the OLDC has been going on since 2021 and happens twice a year, allowing dozens of SRB2 map creators to display their talents, but the event's format, purpose, scheduling, and hosts have changed a lot over the course of its existence. Today, in the wake of the first round of the OLDC occurring this year, I wanted to pay tribute to this event that's been going on for so long. Let's look at the history of the Sonic Robo Blast 2 Original Level Design Collaboration. That was a mouthful. Let's go back, all the way back to 2003. Bush was still in office, a mere 27 days had passed before I was born, and the current version of SRB2 was 1.01, part of the infamous Final Demo series. At the time, modding SRB2 and creating new content for it was a pretty uncommon skill, not helped by the community being so much smaller. In order to spur in the community inspiration to learn this particular skill and increase the amount of community-created content, Team Sonic Jr. member A441 decided to host an unofficial level design competition. This was not the start of the OLDC, but this small upstart competition was seen as the inspiration for the contest creation. Due to the fact that it was the very first event of its nature in the game's history, things were handled a bit differently from the eventual OLDC. Only match maps were accepted, and the maps themselves were only allowed to use textures and assets from Greenflower Zone, the first zone of SRB2's single-player campaign. Voting was handled on the message board, but unfortunately, due to the messages being lost from a crash, the voting methods and map scores are unknown. Most of the information about this contest was retrieved from defunct SRB2 websites that have thankfully been archived. 6 maps were submitted for the competition, 4 of them incidentally being created by the host A441, and a 5th which was ultimately disqualified due to not using the Greenflower Zone assets. This particular map, known as Sapphire Falls, was created by a notable member of the community, Mystic, who was responsible for the famous Mystic Realm level pack, from which the SRB2 challenge level Aerial Garden Zone originates from. Sapphire Falls Zone was DQ'd because of Mystic using a texture that was not allowed, but the level was included as a bonus in the contest level pack and would later be added to the game as an official match map, which is still in the map selection for match as of 2.2. Also included was another bonus level, a 2D match map, which is not very good, but I digress. All the maps are relatively simple, and obviously there's no visual variety to be found since they use the same assets, but for such an early selection of user-created content in the game's life, there's some decent layouts here. The best one in my opinion is Sapphire Hill, which makes sense as it was made by Mystic, undeniably a standout in terms of SRB2 level design talent back in his heyday, which can be seen in Sapphire Hill's comparatively complex layout. I also liked the 4th map, which has a good balance of low ground and high areas for Knuckles and Tails to take advantage of. This SRB2 World Contest was the first instrumental step in the creation of the OLDC, and in July of 2003, Mystic himself decided to begin hosting a monthly series of match map creation contests. Problem is, due to the aforementioned message board crash of October 2003, the voting records and just about all traces of the contest held from July to September are gone. leaving us with only the original files containing the contest entries as well as knowledge of the winning maps. The first OLDC ever hosted in July 2003 was a slight change from the original A441 contests, namely because it was not bound by a visual restriction like the original contest A441 held was, leading to much greater visual variety. There were 4 maps submitted to this contest: Transcendental Fortress Zone, Vacant Rocket Ship Zone, Blue Sky Zone, and Snow Hill Zone, each level sporting unique visuals to give them their own flair and character. Ironically, the first ever winner of the OLDC contest was the host of the OLDC's predecessor. A441's Transcendental Fortress took home the gold, becoming the first ever winning OLDC map. Personally, I was a bigger fan of Snow Hill. I loved the open design and the many layers to the layout, while Transcendental Fortress is much smaller and more linear, but I suppose for something as chaotic as SRB2 Match, the former is probably more fun. The following month's OLDC once again has no surviving records of the voting process. August 2003's contest had another 4 entrants: Tet's Base Zone, Green Hill DM Zone, Waterfall Island Zone, and Nitric Nexus Zone. My favorite of these 4 by far is Tet's Base. Starting the level, it's kind of a fucking mess of colors. The purple floor made me think it was poison at first, and there's so much damn brown. But you quickly realize that the whole stage is supposed to be a bedroom. It's pretty clever, and the layout is cool as well. Green Hill DM is neat, but a bit too simple. It's just a lot of wide open space with not many environmental gimmicks. And Nitrous Nexus is the complete opposite. It feels like if you played a match game here, you'd struggle not to die, let alone while trying to shoot your competition. The winner of the contest was Tet's Base by Tets. During September, there were 2 contests held. While Mystic continued to host the OLDC as usual, A441 also decided to host his own competition, which was focused on the Capture the Flag mode. I absolutely adored the CTF mode, but these maps are fraught with issues that I assume would have made them quite awkward to play in. The winner of the contest, Iron Fortress Zone by Arity, as well as Twin Peaks Zone by A441, were both added to the Capture the Flag map selection in Final Demo 1.08. But neither proved to be very popular and were removed in later demos. Anyway, onto the September 2003 OLDC. When the message board crashed, the voting for September was still in progress. When the message boards were relaunched in November, voting for the September contest continued, making the September 2003 OLDC the first one for which there are existing records of the votes, although the original records are gone due to the crash. 5 stages were submitted this time: Loopy Tunnel Zone, Sacred Realm Zone, Jason's Base Zone, Flame Valley Zone, and Sky Walkway Zone. The 2 that interested me the most were Jason's Base and Sacred Realm. Jason's Base takes place in a bedroom, similar to Tet's Base from the August 2003 OLDC, which is just a cool concept in general, while Sacred Realm has a very abstract visual design and some neat gameplay gimmicks. With a score of 8.33, A441's Loopy Tunnel Zone took the crown as the September 2003 OLDC winner. Since the server was down for October and the September contest took place in November, there was never a 2003 October OLDC, and the contest picked up in December with the November 2003 OLDC. This month had a whopping 10 entries, twice the amount of September's. There are quite a few standouts in this roundup. I loved the aesthetics of Food Fight Zone by Christus and Rainbow Stadium by A441. Both stages are distinct. Rainbow Stadium's multicolored madness is incredibly neat once you get past the shock to the eyes it provides in the beginning. And Food Fight being designed after a diner is incredibly cute. I love the seats and the drink dispensers. Water, cola, and grape soda, a selection worthy of its inclusion. I liked the concept of Dark Sewer Zone, which seems to have been a joint creation between A441 and Neo Gen Gamer, but the layout is incredibly cramped and I could see it being quite confusing in an actual match. And Tranquility Zone is a 2D map, which is always awkward. Then there's Sky High by Eric, a level which I have to highlight because it attracted a lot of attention to itself. For all the wrong reasons. This level's final score was a 1.0, and it got absolutely torn apart by just about everyone who voted. And once you play it, it's not hard to see why. The placement of rings is haphazard, and according to the people who voted and discussed it, it had major issues with power-up placement and spawn points. Also, it's ugly, and the platform layout just makes it way too easy to fall. Everyone who voted gave this stage a 1 out of 10. That should speak for how people perceived it. Sorry, Eric. The contest ended in a tie, with Rainbow Stadium and Nightmare Ring both obtaining a 7.75 and being named joint winners. The final OLDC of 2003 presented an interesting twist to the formula. For December's OLDC, Mystic had decided to shift the event away from match mode and rotate the OLDC's mode of focus. For December 2023, the OLDC would focus on single-player stages. In a pre-voting message board post, Mystic had expressed confidence in the community to have a plentiful amount of submissions despite how much more complex single-player maps were than match mode maps. That confidence was evidently misplaced. 3 entries for December 2003, a stark drop from November's 10. It was even less entries than the first map contest A441 held back in June, which seemed like a disappointment to much of the community members at the time. On the bright side, the fact that they're all single-player stages means I can accurately rate them based on my experience, as opposed to match maps, which I'm obviously not going to be able to because who the hell is going to boot up Final Demo 1.04 and play match games with me? Anyway, the 3 entries are Mine Maze Zone by Lost Game Maker, Shrouded Terminal Zone by Furious Fox, and Poison Paradise by Tets. I think my least favorite pretty definitively was Mine Maze. There's little platforming and instead it's just a cramped series of hallways a la Mega Man X3. Not very fun. Shrouded Terminal is interesting, with the main gimmick being to press buttons and open up parts of the stage, similar to the Final Demo era versions of Castle Eggman. It's a neat idea, but it's marred by bad level design that makes it rather confusing to navigate. It's also swarmed with enemies, which is kind of annoying. My favorite was Poison Paradise. It's the most linear of the stages and sort of plain, with aesthetics taken straight from Techno Hill, but the design is solid and I found it pretty fun. It also ended up winning the division of that year with a score of 7.43, wrapping up that year's final OLDC. It seemed like a bright new frontier for the game's community, even with the slight misstep, but things wouldn't be as fruitful as you might think going into the next year. In January of 2004, submissions for the next OLDC began. After the attempt at single-player focus flopped, Mystic decided to revert the competition to focusing exclusively on match mode. Also, this was the first OLDC to focus on a new version of the game, Final Demo 1.08. 7 maps were submitted for this competition, and with exception to Nightside Rouge Zone, they all garnered scores of over 6, making this a pretty strong selection. Nightside Rouge's mixed reception mostly came from the stage's small size and minimalistic design. In terms of visuals, it's pretty great. The standouts for me were Mushroom Kingdom Zone by Furious Fox and Deep Ruin Zone by Blaze Hedgehog. Very strong selection overall, and the winner of the contest was Cloudscape Zone by Tets with a score of 7.29. Ouch. 3 entries. February of 2004's OLDC had the lowest turnout for a match-based OLDC yet. Abandoned Factory Zone by Tets, Sun Shrine Zone by Mystic, and Caved Barracks by Fox Unit 01. Sun Shrine appears to have received flack for its small, cramped design, but I liked it. Abandoned Factory and Caved Barracks were solid and creative too, so while the turnout was small, at least the match maps were well done. Caved Barracks took home first place with a score of 7.86. After the completion of the February OLDC, Mystic announced plans to hold a contest in March that would allow for maps of every single game type, not just match, but also single player and CTF. Unfortunately, turnout was low enough that the deadline for submissions was moved to April in hopes of attracting more people. When entries remained sparse, the competition was cancelled. And with the OLDC cancelled, things went quiet for most of 2004, until the tail end of the year. Deciding to take a gamble, A441 restarted the OLDC in December 2004, and their gamble paid off. December 2004's OLDC featured a staggering 23 entries, over twice the amount of the November 2003 OLDC that previously held the crown with 10. There were many standout maps here. Thunder Citadel Zone by Mystic might be familiar to people who have played large amounts of match mode in SRB2. After its debut in this OLDC, it was added to the game as an official match map. It also scored highly with a 7.50, narrowly missing the victory. Lunar Facility Zone by Furious Fox and Ruined Fortress Zone by SRB2 Playa also managed scores of over 7.0, being very strong showings from their respective creators. The most quote-unquote controversial map was Illustrian Zone by JTE. Many people praised the stage, and it accrued scores of 9s and even some 10s from people who enjoyed its visuals and the unique mechanic of water that pushes you up. On the opposite spectrum, there were a few people who disliked the water mechanics and rated it either average or low, with the worst score it received being a 3. A user named Some Guy ended up submitting 3 match maps, and funnily enough, they happened to create both the highest and lowest scoring maps. MI finished with a 1.11, and it's easy to see why once you actually play it. I imagine trying to do any actual matches here would be undermined by the fact that you'll be spending most of your time getting shot by the 5 or so turrets here. It's a shitty concept that many people derided and used as an example of why you don't put turrets in a match map. The highest rated stage, Winter Valley Zone, is much better, with wide open design and variety of power-up rings, and it took home the competition with a 7.56 score. The following month, in January of 2005, A441 hosted the next OLDC. We've got 13 submissions this time. A small new twist was introduced for this edition. For the January 2005 OLDC, the author of the maps would not be revealed until the winner was chosen, which was presumably implemented to prevent people from voting based on who created the maps over the quality of the maps themselves. The quality for maps seems to have dipped slightly, with many entries receiving scores lower than a 7, and 2 of them, Abandoned Outpost by A441 and Mirror Room Zone by Chaos064, scoring a 4.60 and a 4.40 respectively. They were on the weaker side for sure, but we have some strong contenders. I really liked Sylvan Island Zone's aesthetics, and the pirate ship was a nice touch. Some Guy, the person who submitted December 2004's winning map, once again made a ton of maps for this contest, including MI2, a sequel to the panned MI from the last OLDC that improved over the first one with broader design and less turrets. Good man. Some Guy's Riverside Zone took home the trophy with a score of 8.40. In March of 2005, Mystic decided to return as the host of the OLDC, and with his return came a new format implemented to completely change how the OLDC would be run for the next 10 years. The biggest change was the official implementation of multiple divisions. Rather than just creating maps for match mode, the OLDC would now feature competitions for the different modes, with his first one having single player and match categories. The other major change was a shift to a bi-monthly schedule, with creators now having 2 months to create and submit maps. With these two changes and an energized community, it seemed like the OLDC was entering a new era of success. At this point, I'm convinced Mystic might have the shittiest luck ever. After 2 relatively smooth OLDCs run by A441, Mystic's return apparently prompted a large enough drop in submissions that the March-April OLDC of 2005 was ultimately cancelled, although the maps that were submitted still got released. Only 6 maps were sent in for this OLDC, a paltry amount compared to the first competition held in 2005, and the biggest insult is, most of them were match maps, leaving the single-player division with only 1 map, made by Furious Fox called Glue Metropolis Zone Act 1. It's a city-themed level, which is always a plus in my book, and it managed to get a pretty high amount of praise in spite of the lack of competition. The match maps had some creative ideas, but it was a true shame to see the OLDC start off like this. Thankfully, the next OLDC, taking place across May and June, attracted a sufficient amount of entrants for both the single-player and match divisions, thus allowing the competition part of the OLDC to go on. Unfortunately, due to an issue, Jungle Island Zone by Robo was lost and cannot be downloaded, but considering the stage received a score of 2.0, I can assume we're not missing much, and the other single-player levels are still downloadable. For the first OLDC to feature a single-player division with a halfway decent selection, there's some strong contenders. Furious Fox released a sequel to Glue Metropolis Zone Act 1, although this Act 2 definitely did not get the same level of praise the first one did, and many people criticized it for being too linear and ultimately not living up to the first act. A user called Shadowhog submitted a map for both divisions, but what makes these levels interesting is that they're both direct ports of stages from other games. Dead Simple Zone taken from Doom 2 and Castle Wolfenstein Zone taken from, well, Wolfenstein. Both levels received average scores, but also led to the implementation of a rule banning direct ports from other games, which is fair enough for a level design contest. By far the most acclaimed submission in the single-player division was Egg Palace by Some Guy, which received a myriad of 9s and 10s. Now this is a level I very much understand the praise it got at the time. It was certainly a technical achievement for the time. It's incredibly large with numerous alternate paths and very complex architecture. Unfortunately, playing it today is kind of infuriating. I'm not a fan of the vague navigation nor the swarm of enemies that serves to make the immensely precise platforming required even more difficult. This level just kind of pissed me off, but it ultimately won the single-player division with a score of 7.54. In the match division, the standouts for me were Piano Room by Big Boy, which has a great design, and Nocturnal Sahara Zone by Digiku. Nocturnal Sahara was the winner of the match division with a staggering 9.14 score and was added to the official game as a match map in Final Demo 1.09 under the name Desolate Twilight Zone. Following this was the July-August OLDC of 2005. Once again, the original single-player files were lost, leaving WED by ARF unplayable, while Storm Ruin Zone is only playable in Furious Fox's Acid Missile level pack. The remaining levels are Aerial Factory Zone by ST218 and Dark Palisades Zone by Tets, which won the division with an 8.33 score. On the match side of things, it seemed that the quality of entries was starting to dip slightly, as all the stages in this division scored under a 7. The large amount of average scores was attributed to many gameplay issues, and the only stages that stand out conceptually are Peach's Castle Zone by Chaos064, which is a recreation of the outside of Peach's Castle from Super Mario 64, and Amphitheater Zone, which has a cool, if somewhat basic design. J. James 19119's Green Area Hills Zone Act 2 won the match division with a 6.63, and the quality of submissions only continued to dip as we went on. September-October 2005's OLDC was, to put it lightly, a disaster, with the average score of maps being lower than any prior OLDC. The highest score any map in any division in this contest scored was a 6.60, and it only gets worse from here. This was the first OLDC to have any map score lower than 1. Mikhail's Egyptian Twilight Zone and Robo Ashora's The Maze received scores of 0.29 and 0.40 respectively, but by far the most panned map in the entire competition was the Shining River by Mikhail. This map finished the competition with a score of 0.00. The level was slammed for its tight corridors, uncreative design, and putting all the rings in one place. It's pretty easy to see why it was considered so horrible, even without running a match game in it. The awesomest level, a joke submitted by Digiku that was made purposefully bad, ended up scoring higher. Let that sink in. The only other standout submission was the Elemental Ruins, which had a wonderful concept of 3 rooms with water, electric, and fire-based hazards. Cool idea, although most voters agreed it wasn't anything special. It still won the match division though, with a 6.60, while the single-player division was won by Molten Cave Zone, scoring a 4.50. Not exactly a great way to end this contest. Thankfully, the final OLDC of 2005 would bring things back to a level of quality expected from the previous incarnations. Whereas the September-October 2005 OLDC had the contest's first ever 0.00 score, November-December 2005 saw the first ever perfect score in the SRB2 OLDC. Having come off numerous OLDC wins the prior year, Some Guy returned to end this year with a massive bang, releasing Tree Ring to universal acclaim from the community. The map was praised for its layout and visual design as well as creative gimmicks and managed to win the division with a perfect 10.0. The stage was later added to the official SRB2 match map selection in Final Demo 1.09.4, although it didn't last long. Time definitely dulled people's thoughts on it, and in a few years, most considered it to be a mediocre and overrated map. A sad end to a historic stage. It remained the only map in the game's history to get a perfect score. It also had strong competition with Four Seasons Zone by Oogaland, which scored a 9.50. Close, but no cigar. In the single-player division, 3 maps were submitted, but unfortunately 2 of them were lost, leaving the winner of the division, Incomplete Xmas by Shadowhog, unplayable. Only Molten Mountain Highway is available to play, which is quite unfortunate. Overall though, 2005 was a strong return to form for the OLDC, and the revelation of certain stages getting scores such as 9.50s and 10s showed that the community was full of talent yet to be displayed. The next OLDC, which kicked off the season for 2006, took place across January and February. For this contest, a new division was added. Joining the current single-player and match division, a new sector for Capture the Flag was added. Now I fucking love Capture the Flag. It's probably my favorite SRB2 multiplayer mode, so seeing it get some love is great. Remember, the last Capture the Flag related contest was an unrelated competition from 2003 held by A441, almost 3 years before this current OLDC. Only 3 maps were submitted for the official CTF division of the OLDC, and they all scored over an 8.0, so although the selection was short, the submissions were all of very high quality. I especially like the layout and aesthetic of Metal Star Zone, and how it's very out in the open, with simple architecture and plenty of space to move around. Metal Star Zone by Furious Fox won the CTF division with a score of 8.71. On the single-player side, there were 3 submissions for this division as well, including a sequel to Furious Fox's Storm Ruin Zone Act 1 from the July-August 2005 OLDC. Known as Storm Ruin Zone Act 2, it's pretty fun, but it's got a few annoying instant death scenarios that are a bit irritating. Arrow's Shrine Zone, created by Tets, was the most fun in my opinion, with very wide-open level design, and it took home first place with an 8.78 score. Finally, for the match division, there weren't a whole lot of standouts, but the winner was Oogaland's Octagonal Zone, which has a very inventive layout that seems like an absolute blast, with numerous ascending layers. All 3 winning maps scored over an 8.0, which was also very impressive and a strong start for the OLDC. Keep Oogaland's name in the back of your mind, because he'll be returning in a little bit. The March-April 2006 OLDC was the biggest OLDC to have been hosted at this point, with a total of 27 entries across all 3 existing divisions, breaking the former record of 24 from the 2004 December OLDC. Unfortunately, once again, a few stages in the single-player pack were lost. Whoever was supposed to be maintaining those is doing a terrible job. Thankfully, unlike the last time this happened, the winner of the division, Sunken Palace Zone, is still available to play. It won with a rather mediocre score of 7.56, which doesn't seem that bad until you realize that all the other stages scored between 5.0 and 3.75. Not the greatest set of submissions this time around, unfortunately, and that also sort of extended to the other 2 divisions. There were a few standouts though. For the match side, we have Rocky Ravine Zone by Blue Blur, which scored an 8.56, and Rush Job Zone by Fred, which scored an 8.0. As the name would suggest, this level was created in a very short amount of time, 60 whole minutes, an hour, and he managed to create a level that scored high enough to get 3rd. Not bad. The winner of this division was Greenery Hotel by J. James 19119, and he also managed to win the CTF division with Wall Fortress scoring an 8.0. Surprisingly, the record that March-April had set for the highest amount of submissions was promptly shattered once again in the May-June 2006 OLDC, with 32 submissions across all 3 divisions. The CTF division was rather small, with only 2 maps to select from, and the single-player division had a disproportionately high amount of maps this time, with a total of 9, the most of any OLDC so far. Oogaland, who had previously won the match division from the January-February 2006 OLDC, continued to submit maps for all 3 divisions, and this time he would take home the Triple Crown, with his submissions winning in all 3 divisions. Rocky Pass Zone in the single-player division, Sheltered Waterfall Zone in the match division, and Lily Pad Zone in the CTF division. Good shit! While the match division this time was brimful with low scores ranging from low 6s to a 0.20, the single-player division had its fair share of very strong competitors, with 3 other levels scoring over an 8.0. New division time! For the July-August 2006 OLDC, a 4th category was added into the mix, for race mode, more specifically circuit race maps, which are small race arenas where players partake in multi-lap races, not unlike your standard Mario Kart or SRB2 Kart. 9 stages were submitted for this division, quite a strong start, and there's a few standouts. Although it ended with a rather miserable score of 3.80, I actually kinda like Royal Raceway Zone by Spazzo. It's not exactly pioneering in originality, considering it's just the track Royal Raceway from Mario Kart 64, but I don't know, I kinda like the novelty, although it's rather cramped in design, with not much variety in terms of how you can get around. Four Seasons Zone by Oogaland is pretty good too, once again taking advantage of the whole changing seasons gimmick for some nice aesthetics. The winner of the division, Race Alley Zone by Fox Blitz, scored an 8.86 and was the highest scoring circuit level in the history of the OLDC. It was added to the official circuit map selection in SRB2 2.0. In the other 3 existing divisions, we once again have a nearly full category sweep by one user, JJames19119, whose Moon Palace Zone won the single-player division with an 8.0, while the CTF division was taken by his level Greenery Caves, which scored a 7.60. For the match division, we had a tie between Chaotic Belief Zone by James and Glacier Cocktail Zone by Fred, both of whom scored a 7.43. I actually enjoyed Glacier Cocktail a lot more, at least conceptually. The idea is absolutely adorable, and the giant orange in the middle of the drink is a great touch. The final OLDC of 2006 took place across the last 4 months of the year. During the submission process for the September-October contest, Mystic's email ended up having issues, resulting in people not being able to submit their stages, so the contest was stretched across November and December. Surprisingly, despite having 4 months of leeway, the September-December 2006 OLDC ended up having less submissions than the previous 2, and no single-player maps were submitted. On top of that, only 2 circuit maps and 3 CTF maps were submitted, making for an uncharacteristically small selection. The winner of the match division was Ivory Square Zone by DigiQ with an 8.44, where the CTF division, Card Carnival Zone by JJames19119 took home the gold with an 8.0, and in the battle of the 2 circuit submissions, Sunset Garden by Flame was the winner. At the beginning of 2007, another OLDC began. The January-February 2007 OLDC has 26 entries in total, a pretty strong amount, but these numbers are a bit deceptive. 10 of them were submitted by the same person, a user going by the name of Glaber. Unfortunately, almost all of their maps were received pretty poorly. Across the match and circuit division, nothing they submitted was considered very good. Many of Glaber's match maps were plagued by tight corridors or hallways and uncreative ring layout, while their circuit maps had some issues with character-specific paths that just don't work very well. Battlewood Zone in particular was the recipient of major criticism because of Glaber's decision to include enemies and a boss, not to mention the fact that you had to defeat the enemies to actually move on. Not the best idea for a mode focused on getting to the finish line as fast as possible. The only map of Glaber's that got decently high marks was their CTF map, Diamondis Zone, which placed second in its division with a strong 8.27 score. The single-player division consisted of 2 submissions, Greenfield Zone and Galsepius Mountain Zone. Greenfield is a very weird level, taking place in an isometric point of view and almost being a straight recreation of Greenflower Zone Act 1 from the SRB2 single-player campaign. It's very odd and wasn't that fun to play. On the other hand, I loved Galsepius Mountain Zone. It's got very open level design and the visuals and music are incredible. It won the division with an 8.71. For the match side of things, a user named Rob submitted the winning map, Emerald Park Zone, which won with a 7.20. It's a bit basic in terms of layout, but I liked the concept and the execution was solid. The CTF division's winner was Castle Canyon Zone by Mystic with an 8.82, and the circuit division was won by JJames19119's Ice Cap Zone with 7.60. Fairly solid winning scores all around. Tier by Blue064 was probably the most controversial map since Illustrian Zone from the December 2004 OLDC. It ended with a score of 6.18, and the scores it received varied, with some rating it as high as 8 and some as low as 3. The level's layout is interesting because it focuses more on navigating around obstacles rather than pure speed, and as the name would imply, it's got multiple floors you have to race around. Definitely a cool level, but also pretty obstructive in some ways. March-April 2007 was a fairly standard OLDC, but there was one rather big shock, and it was an utter lack of match submissions. Contrasting prior OLDCs that were dominated by match submissions, this time around there's only 5, which is shockingly low. Meanwhile, the fairly new Circuit division had 9, nearly double the amount of submissions match got. Whether this is because circuit maps are easier to make and balance or because some creators got tired of match, either way, it's definitely odd to see given how match-centric the OLDC had been up to this point. The match division ended in a tie between Industrial Sink Zone by some guy and Fort Eltsack by Shadowhog with a 7.73. They're both fairly solid, but besides them and Pirate Ship, which has a neat concept, the match selection was pretty unspectacular and voters weren't really spoiled for choice. The single-player division was once again only made up of 2 maps. Doomsday Zone finished with a score of 1.55, which was primarily a result of being way too short and being a 2D level with a few control issues. It's a good idea, but man was it mishandled and it does not live up to the original Doomsday Zone from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Molten Core by Calum, on the other hand, is more conventional, and it's a decent level, although it won the division with a slightly above average 6.11 score. For Circuit, the most populous division, the amount of average and below average scores was concerningly high. In fact, Generic Green Zone, the winner of the division, won with a 6.80, the highest score. The Awesomest Races name suggests that it was a spiritual successor to the Awesomest level from the September-October 2005 OLDC, but it was made by a totally different person, and it ended up scoring much lower than that level did. Glaber, the person who submitted 10 maps in the prior OLDC, created a sequel to his panned Battle Wood Zone, but evidently they missed the memo on how sequels are supposed to improve from the original, and it ended up getting a lower score. Battle Wood Zone Act 1 got a 1.82, while Act 2 got a 1.75. Many of the circuit maps suffered from cramped and overly vague level design that made it hard to survive, let alone complete the race. The only one from the selection I enjoyed besides the winner was Elemental Ring Zone, but to be honest, as much as I like the whole 4 seasons and elements gimmick, this is like the 5th level I've played that uses this concept and it's starting to feel played out. Incidentally, the CTF division, which had the second lowest number of submissions, ended with the highest scoring winner, Amber Fortress Zone by Chaos064 with an 8.0. The number situation didn't get much better going into the May-June 2007 OLDC, with the number of entries further dwindling from 21 to 16. Although the match division was back to being the majority, it narrowly won in this regard over the circuit and single-player division 6-4, leaving almost all divisions with a fairly level amount of submissions. Glaber, who submitted over a dozen maps over the past 2 OLDCs, decided to try his hand at a 3rd act of Battle Wood Zone. I appreciate the tenacity and the common sense to make a stage based on the concept of killing enemies a single-player stage rather than a circuit map, but the odd music and the slow premise fails to make this much of an improvement over the last 2. The winner of the single-player division was Nuclear Sunset Zone Act 1 by Blue064 with a 7.64, a good score for a good level. Definitely an improvement over the winner of the last single-player division. Circuit maps were sparse this time around, and the 2 that were actually submitted both ended with very low scores. Furious Gorge Zone won the division with 3.81. The CTF division's winner was Capture the Flag Zone by some guy, but the real attraction was the match division. 2 winter-themed levels, Winter Twilight Zone by I'll Begin and Snow Shrine Zone by Oogaland, fought a very close battle for the top spot. They were both praised highly among the many people voting, and the final count was extremely close. Winter Twilight scored an 8.10. Snow Shrine scored an 8.11, barely edging out Winter Twilight and winning the division. Following this, the July-August 2007 OLDC continued to see a drop in entries, with a mere 11. No division had more than 4 entries, but at the very least the scores were solid all around. In particular, the winner of the single-player division, Nuclear Sunset Zone Act 2, was highly praised for its complexity and layout and won with a 9.50, an incredibly strong showing. Hazard Plant by Senku Nyola won the match division with a 7.0, and the CTF division was run by Calm Rant and their Lush Fall Zone map. The most interesting level, however, was the winner of the Circuit division. Dark Matter Freeway Zone by Chaos064 was the first ever OLDC submission to be a Nights Mode level. For those who are unaware, Nights Mode is SRB2's imitation of the gameplay of the Sega Saturn cult classic Nights into Dreams. It's known for being the basis of SRB2 special stages starting from 2.1, but it existed as far back as the final demo series of releases thanks to the hidden stage Spring Hill Zone. The map's winning score was a 5.67, about as average as you could get, but it is notable for setting the precedent. The September-October 2007 OLDC was a pretty standard contest as far as how the year had been going for the most part. The single-player division was won by yet another sequel level, Arid Ruin Zone Act 2. Act 1 was originally submitted for the May-June 2006 OLDC, where it narrowly lost to Rocky Pass Zone in the single-player division, but its sequel managed to clinch the win this time. Incidentally, it actually accrued a lower score, a 7.50 compared to Act 1's 8.10, so paradoxically, the worst map ended up winning. Funny how that went. The map itself is fine, but navigating it is pretty confusing and the overall direction is vague. Meadow Falls is short and quite forgettable, and Tainted Way has some neat ideas, but it also has some irritating gimmicks and whoa! This fucking scary custom boss battle against a wizard that jump scares the shit out of you. The match division was won by Shadowhawk's Courtyard Clash Zone with a 7.63, and the circuit division's winner was Furious Fox's Sky Cannon Zone with a 6.71. On the CTF side, however, it seemed the effort was spared on this division. Only 2 CTF maps were submitted. Miles Beach Zone was a joke level that was made intentionally bad and scored a fitting 0.42 score, while Oh My God ZCTF, a level that was supposedly made in earnest, didn't fare much better, winning the division with a 2.55. It is a bit unfortunate seeing my favorite mode get the shaft this time around, that's for sure. One more thing, September-October 2007's OLDC was the first to be hosted by Furious Fox, after Mystic was unable to participate as the host, and he would end up taking over for a fair bit of time. The final OLDC of 2007 took place across November and December, and offered nothing really to talk about, in regards to levels that stand out for being impressive or otherwise. Similar to the January-February 2007 OLDC, where the user Glaber submitted 10 maps, another person named Sonic Master submitted 7 out of the 17 maps for the contest, with his work practically making up half of the damn selection. The winner of the single-player division was Sapphire Coast Zone Act 1 by Blade, who had created the level for a level pack he was working on called Lost Worlds. While he never finished that level pack, many of the levels he submitted for the OLDC were originally created for it, and a fair few of them would receive quite high praise. Super Special Zone, one of the many levels submitted by Sonic Master, was actually an attempt at making a special stage, which is a neat idea, but a bit too minimalistic for something like this. Nux Emerald Hunt, another Sonic Master creation, had a similar premise to the Knuckles levels in Sonic Adventure. Again, a creative idea, but executed poorly. The match division was taken by Leafy Cave Zone, also made by Blade and finishing with a 6.75. I think my favorite stage in this division was a level submitted by Kei Sakato. It's called Fail, which is quite a foreboding name, but you realize how well it fits when you see that the entire level is just a small square room with the word fail spelled out in big red letters. Nice. All Hail Shadow by Penopat won the CTF division with a 7.57, and Dimensional Zone Act 2 by Sims Magic won the Circuit division with a 5.20. 2008 was an interesting year for SRB2 and for the OLDC. By this point, the event had been running for 5 years and a new version of the game was on the horizon. 2008's 6 OLDCs were full of surprises, shocks, and standout stages, so let's jump right in, starting with January-February. The first interesting thing to note about this year is that for most of the OLDCs that took place, the single-player division was the most populous one. With exceptions to one set of months, for the most part, the majority of the maps submitted were single-player, and this was the first time that it really happened. Remember, back when Mystic had attempted to introduce single-player stages into the OLDC in 2003, the amount of submissions was usually very low, to the point that some OLDCs had to be cancelled for that reason. Now, it seemed that the tides had turned and single-player was on top. Going into the single-player division, many of the stages were marked with pretty poor scores due to either being too short, too linear, or plain irritating. Diamond Glab Special, a stage submitted by our good friend Glaber, had it the absolute worst. This map is particularly odd because it's a special stage, so in order to play it in the first place, you have to finish the stage after collecting an emerald token. The level was Forever Forest Zone by Blue064, which I definitely think earned its score of 7.0. The stage primarily focused on exploration. There's not much platforming, but it's got a lot of wide open space and it's a pretty complex level layout-wise. It's also pretty beautiful in terms of scenery and lighting, which is good. The level's link was originally broken when it was first submitted, resulting in the stage getting a few 0 out of 10s due to people playing a broken version of the stage, so it likely scored a bit lower than it could have. Still a strong stage though. The match division only had 4 submissions, most of which were rated quite low except for the winner, Physics Lab Zone by Jazz. Although I found myself disliking teleporters and match maps because of how disorienting they can be, I think Physics Lab had a great concept and it's quite distinct visually compared to its competition. It also absolutely slaughtered the other levels in the division in terms of score, with the second highest scoring match submission getting a 2.57 compared to Physics Lab's 7.50, a margin of 4.93. Ouch. The CTF division was won by Fickle Heart and her Season's Greeting Zone submission, which scored a 6.33. Once again, I have to voice how tiring levels based around seasons are getting for me, but it's not a bad level at all. For the first time, the Circuit division had 2 Knights mode levels submitted, Endless Mine Zone and Wacky Track Zone by Sonic Master. To be perfectly honest, I didn't like this level. It's really hard to tell what's in the background and what's in the foreground since they're all the same color. Despite this, it won the division with a 7.0. In regards to the non-Night Circuit submissions, I thought they were fairly solid. TSLX Rough Village and Freezing Flare Zone. They weren't anything amazing, but I found them pretty fun and I liked them aesthetically. Considering the lowest ranking winner of the 4 divisions was a 6.33, I would say these were all pretty strong levels as a whole. The March-April 2008 OLDC was the first OLDC to not receive any submissions for the CTF division, something which seemed inevitable considering the diminishing amount of submissions that division had been getting year after year. The most interesting stage to come from the entirety of the competition was Undersea Palace Zone. It was another pretty controversial stage, with votes ranging from 3 out of 10 to 9 out of 10. The main interest in this level, however, is the actual level design, which was based off of Deep Sea Zone from the actual SRB2 campaign. That doesn't sound that major, but the thing is, Deep Sea Zone wasn't actually included in the most recent version of the game. Undersea Palace was based off of trailers for 2.0, then referred to as 1.1, which showed off Deep Sea Zone, and it reused certain level design elements from the trailer that were shown off, such as waterfalls and platforms placed on rising water. It's also got the Japanese title Tempest theme from Sonic CD for music, which is neat. The level itself, it's alright. Most of the praise it got seemed to come from how closely it resembled Deep Sea Zone, and it's ultimately a pretty uninteresting level compared to the one that influenced it. The winner of the division was Flooded Mine Zone with a 6.0. Oh hey, another water-themed level. The slightly above average score is something I can't reciprocate or disagree with because the level crashed on me before I could complete it. I guess it wasn't meant to be. The match division was arguably one of the lowest quality selections of levels to date, with all 3 submissions scoring under a 6. Incidentally, the winner of the division was a joke level created by Glaber. Voice Concern Zone was created to address an issue Glaber had with the revamped match mode that was planned for the upcoming release of 2.0 and had been previewed in the IRC test beta build released earlier that year. That issue being the addition of Chaos Emeralds to match mode. Glaber brought this issue to light by means of including Chaos Emeralds in Voice Concerned, allowing for the use of super forms. For Sonic, anyway, I couldn't get it to work with Knuckles. Despite being a joke level, it was praised for being shockingly solid in terms of layout, and it easily won over the subpar Carnage Palace Zone and Metal Spire Zone that made up the rest of the division. For the circuit side of things, the lack of quality maps unfortunately carried over to this division, with Mine Maze Zone by Blade winning with a score of 6.0, while the other 2 submissions scored under a 5. May-June of 2008 had the same amount of submissions as the prior 2 months, and this is also the first incarnation of the competition to invoke the rule that disallowed people from submitting multiple maps to a division. Once again, the non-single-player divisions are sparse in terms of submissions, but I guess it's nice to see CTF getting some actual representation after missing out last time. The winner of the single-player division, Magma Core Zone by Blade, was also originally intended for his Lost Worlds level pack, and I actually enjoyed it for the most part. The falling rocks are a bit obnoxious though, and the actual layout is a bit confusing to navigate. Solid stage though. The other standout was Elemental Mansion Zone. Okay, so it's another fucking Elements themed stage, but I enjoyed the layout of this quite a bit. It was another pretty controversial level in terms of voting, with detractors citing the level as having a very monotonous layout, while others praised it for its variety and size. It got quite a few 8s and 9s, but also a few 6s, 5s, and even scores below that. Ultimately, it finished with a score of 6.32, slightly above average. Arid Oasis Zone and Limestone Ruin Zone were both DQ'd due to having been released before the competition. Not much to talk about in the match division. Plumber's Tower, the winner of the division, is a cool idea where it shifts between the various Mario themes as you go higher and higher up the stage, but I think the verticality of the design is ultimately what caused its middling final score of 6.56. I thought Hyrule Temple would be interesting, but despite the concept, it feels pretty generic. Nothing about it really screams Zelda, and instead it's just a very basic, very bland stage that feels too derivative of Aerial Garden Zone. The winner of the CTF division was Scorching Ice Flow Zone by Oogaland with a 6.50. That is a fairly solid stage, despite the dual elements gimmick being woefully overdone by this point. Finally, Backwards Race by Sonic Master won this circuit division. Another Knights level. The gimmick is, instead of moving to the right, you move to the left. My jaw is on the floor. Going into July-August, we had yet another sweep by one user, Sonic Master, who managed to win almost every division. This isn't as impressive as it sounds, since both the CTF and Circuit divisions were only joined by one other level besides Sonic Master's submission. Cylindrical Mine Zone won the CTF division with a 5.17, and Lost Pants Get Zone won the Circuit division with a 5.60. Pretty unimpressive scores altogether. The single-player division didn't fare much better in terms of numbers, with 3 submissions, being the only OLDC of 2008 to have more match submissions than single-player ones. Sonic Master's winning stage was Poison Palace Zone, which got a 7.21, a solid score overall, and it's a pretty good level. The match division was the only one not won by Sonic Master, which only happened because of the disqualification of 39 divided by 0, which was included by accident. Despite this, it scored higher than any other map in the division, and had it not been excluded from the competition, it would have won and given Sonic Master a full 4-fold victory. His actual match map that wasn't DQ'd scored a 2.86, and the winner of the division was Sky Island Zone by Roy. September-October OLDC of 2008 saw an uptick in submissions after a few months of relatively low numbers. 23 submissions, the first OLDC to surpass 20 submissions since the March-April OLDC of 2007. The actual scores across the board were pretty low, leaving every division with a pretty definitive winner. For the single player and match divisions, it was Sonic Master's Red Desert Zone and Game Boy Valley respectively. I actually really enjoyed Red Desert a lot. It's got tons of multiple pathways, great visuals, custom textures, nice music, long. The fuck else do you want? It scored a very strong 8.0 and deservedly so. This is a very strong effort. Game Boy Valley got a 6.71. Can't say much about how it functions in regard to matches, but the novelty of being in total black and white is pretty cool. I like it. CTF division was won by Lift Bridge Zone, created by Ezra Arc with a 7.38, and I have to say, it's nice to see a CTF level with a relatively fresh gameplay concept. The bridge is a real neat concept, and I can see this being a blast to play. Finally, the Circuit division was won by Warped Woods Zone, created by Jazz and scoring a 6.57. It's a fairly intricate level with a shitload of obstacles and a relatively long length. This resulted in a divisive amount of scores, with some praising the complex design and some absolutely hating it. Despite this, it was considered strong enough to be added to 2.0 as an official circuit map when that version released. The final OLDC of 2008, taking place over November and December, was notable for a very strong single-player division. This one had 20 submissions, and over half of them was single-player, with 6 out of the 12 single-player submissions garnering scores of 6 or above, which is pretty damn solid for OLDC standards. The 3 strongest performing maps were Blown Fuse Zone by Sonic Master, Death Egg Zone Act 2 by Blade, and Aquatic Labyrinth Zone by Kuja. Blown Fuse Zone is a 2D level, and despite 2D levels generally being maligned, this one was pretty damn good. Solid layout, and it didn't feel like vomit to play. Good job. Aquatic Labyrinth Zone was considered one of the most complex SRB2 levels to have been created at this point, and it won with an 8.47 in a pretty close race overall. The other divisions, once again, sort of lagged behind in terms of numbers. The match division had 4 submissions. Another elemental level, huh? At this point, even saying the word elements is getting tiring. Wasn't a fan of Tainted Rainbow personally, but Spring Peak Zone was at least nice in terms of visuals. Water Plant Zone by Ezra Arc with an 8.33 won the division pretty definitively. Autumn Breeze Zone by Sonic Master won the CTF division with a 6.0, while its only competition, Desert Ruin Zone by Hypernux, scored a 5.0. Pretty middling scores. The Circuit division also only had 2 maps, and neither tickled my peaches personally. I did not like Furry Fox's Volcano Zone. The concept of a stage that can only be completed by one character kinda makes me mad, and the level is bland and empty. Assembly Line Zone by J. James 19119 won the division with a 5.33 score, but this level also had its fair share of design issues and ultimately felt pretty underwhelming. Not the best way to end, but after 2008 we only had a few more months before the new version of SRB2, 2.0, which would hopefully usher in a new era of creativity and wonder in the OLDC. 2009, quite a significant year for many different reasons. Obama was sworn in as the 44th US president, Tiger Woods retired from golf, and after years of teasing and quote-unquote final demo releases, SRB2 2.0 would see its long-awaited release. The first few OLDCs of 2009 still used Final Demo 1.09.4 due to 2.0 not being out, so we're still a ways to getting any 2.0 action. January-February 2009's OLDC was unique for allowing match, CTF, and circuit submissions to use resources from the SRB2 asset pack, which allowed for more visual variety. The single-player selection was interesting this time around. Mr. E Special Stage, another special stage creation by Glaber. I have to admire the tenacity. New Super Mario Bros. Zone was based on New Super Mario Bros., the DS game, and to be honest, I feel a painful existential dread knowing that this OLDC took place around a time when New Super Mario Bros. Wii wasn't even out yet. The level takes place in 2D mode, and aesthetically, it's pretty damn ambitious, using custom sprites from New Super Mario Bros. Unfortunately, in terms of layout, it's pretty bad. This level is a shining example of why Sonic doesn't work in Mario-themed levels. Navigating is a pain because of the many specific jumps, and it's full of blind drops that usually lead to bottomless pits. The winner of the division was North Pole Factory Zone with a 6.56, created by Sonic Master, who, by the way, has been gathering OLDC wins like a squirrel gathers acorns. Besides the Kingdom Hearts reference that scored pretty low despite the neat concept, the only standout of the match division was the winner, Castle de Space by SpaceX Green. I absolutely loved this place's design. It was spacious and wide open, but at the same time, it felt focused in its layout. The CTF division was won by Overheated Zone with a 5.57. This and North Pole Factory Zone were Sonic Master's 9th and 10th OLDC wins. Pretty insane. The winner of the Circuit division was Ezer Ark's Aqueduct Circuit Zone, and I loved this place. Very fun, very concise, felt great to speed through. Good way to bring in the new year. March-April 2009's OLDC yet again had an empty CTF division. I weep for this mode, but despite this and the small numbers in the other multiplayer divisions, this OLDC made up for it with one of the strongest single-player divisions thus far. The lowest scores for any stage here was a 4.45, and 6 of the stages scored over a 6.0. I really enjoyed a lot of the selection here. Aqua Caves was one of my favorites. It's a water level that's quite challenging, and even though some of the instances of split-second reaction required are pretty tough, it's overall very fun. I enjoyed Waterleaf Zone, which is one of the best levels here in terms of aesthetic appeal. It looks wonderful, and the music selection is really nice. Design-wise, it's a bit irritating, but I liked it in spite of that. Vibrant Vendetta is one of the most unique levels in terms of its visuals, with this really unique lighting condition that applies to your character when you're outside. It's pretty fun, but the only issue I have is that there's a section where you have to hold the spin dash button to avoid getting crushed. This is fine, except the only cue you get is a loud explosion sound effect. What if someone was deaf or wanted to play with the audio off? It's not the hardest thing to pick up on, but it just seems needless. The winner of the division was Mill Citadel Act 1 by Ezer Ark, and this is a pretty great level too. It's completely fresh as far as gimmicks is involved, and it's a very fun and challenging level. The whole stage revolves around flour, which pushes you forward, creating numerous challenging sections where you have to fight the flow of the flour. It's extremely unique and an extremely fun stage. This also gave Ezer Ark their 4th consecutive OLDC win and made them one of the few people to have a win in every division. The match division was won by Heaven Meadows with a 5.67, but I actually liked the other stage that it was competing with a lot more. Great Gorge of Water Zone by Sonic Master is an attempt to create a match map that takes place entirely underwater. Instead of forcing the players to constantly grab air bubbles, the water drains every few seconds. A simple but neat idea in my opinion, although it was criticized for its bland layout and it scored a pretty pathetic 3.20. Definitely could have used a bit more fleshing out. The Circuit division was unspectacular as well, with only the winner, Endless Woods Zone, standing out. Scale the Earth Zone is overly long and full of irritating platforming gimmicks. Volcano Park Zone, on the other hand, is a little too short, and I didn't care for Scorching Factory Zone either. Endless Woods definitely has more virtue than being put up against a bunch of subpar levels though. It's a very well designed track. May-June 2009 was the final OLDC to take place during the final demo era, and what better way to end than with some of the best single-player stages yet. Ezer Ark's Mill Citadel Zone Act 1 and Kuja's Aquatic Labyrinth Zone Act 1, 2 previous contest winners, both received second acts from their creators, and both got as much, if not higher, praise than the first. Mill Citadel Act 2 had more expansive level design, more pathways, and more creative uses of the flower. Aquatic Labyrinth Zone Act 2 had a factory setting with some neat wind gimmicks, not to mention just being longer and more complex, which is pretty insane considering the first act was already very complex. Both maps scored over an 8.0. Joining them in their high marks was Hidden Sanctuary Zone Act 2. I don't remember Act 1, but this is a damn good level, set at night and featuring some really solid level design and a good flow. Factory Farce Zone Act 1 is alright. It was an attempt to recreate the bouncing floor gimmick of Wacky Workbench Zone from Sonic CD in 3D, and despite some oddly empty level design and layout, it's pretty solid. Mill Citadel Zone Act 2 won the division with an 8.52, but it was damn close overall. The multiplayer pack unfortunately is incomplete, leaving the winner of the Circuit division, Star Reactor Zone by Kuja, unplayable. Its competition was Submerged Cavern Zone by Cheese, which was pretty short and mediocre. The match and CTF divisions were pretty unspectacular, with no stages really standing out. Aerial Match Zone, the winner of the match division, is okay, but fairly generic in terms of visuals. The CTF division was won by Geometric Void, which does look fairly cool and has some nice alternate paths, but it's nothing special. In July of 2009, SRB2 Demo 2.0 was finally released. This was a massive release, adding new levels, modding features, an overhaul of the match weapon system, and a host of new additions and changes. Since it released in July, the OLDC was paused after June, and thus there was no OLDC for July and August in 2009. The OLDC returned for September and October of 2009, so let's see what the first OLDC of 2.0 has to offer. Interestingly, it seemed that the new version inspired a shift in game mode preference, with the previously neglected multiplayer divisions now returning as the majority. This and the next OLDC of 2009 both had shockingly low single-player selection, which is a bit of a bummer as single player stages are obviously the easiest to evaluate for me, but it's nice to see CTF and Circuit getting some more love. Despite Match dominating this contest, it was arguably the weakest division, with the winning stage, Azure Lake Zone by Coatrack, only getting a 6.20. Many of the stages were designed with the old pre-2.0 match system in place, so they often had bad power-up ring placement and ring layouts unsuited to the new battle system. CTF didn't fare much better, tons of mediocre scores, but the one big standout was CTF Canyon Zone by Eggman Fan. This level was universally reviled by the voters for numerous reasons. The falling rocks, the overly tight layout, the poor weapon placement, the instant kill quicksand which practically guarantees death if you get caught in it while carrying a flag. It got absolutely slammed and ended the competition as the second level in OLDC history to receive a 0.0 score. Except the other level with that honor, the Shining River Zone, was disqualified after its release, which gives Canyon CTF Zone the dubious honor of technically being the only OLDC submission to have received a 0.0. Hats off, Eggman Fan. The single player division wasn't all bad. I think Refurbished Gadgetry Zone is decent. It's pretty long and very challenging, but also very forgiving. Not a fan of all the anti-gravity or the rehash to the infamous wind tunnel from Egg Rock Zone Act 2. That shit didn't need to be here. Magma Core Zone Act 2 by Blade was the winner of the division with a 7.83. It's not a follow-up, but rather a remake of sorts of Magma Core Zone from the May-June 2008 OLDC, completely redesigned with new sections that make use of gimmicks added in 2.0 to a very good effect. The Circuit division was quite miserable, with Egg Flower Zone by Mach being a rather short and rudimentary level that also forces you to stop to gather oxygen. Stopping. That's something you don't really want to do in a race level. Its competition, Frostbite Peak Zone by Fickleheart, wasn't much better. Racing with ice gimmicks just isn't that fun, but it is better than Egg Flower Zone, and one with a 5.19. The final OLDC of 2009, taking place across November and December, shattered expectations and records to become the highest number of submissions any OLDC had received up to this point. 34 whopping entries. Holy shit. This record wouldn't be beaten for a solid decade, which is pretty impressive. And also kind of sad. Anyway, thanks to this large influx of submissions, we have a lot to unpack. Being the smallest division of the contest, single player was also understandably forgettable. The winner, Moonlit Mountain Zone by Krabs, scored a 7.79, a pretty solid score, but I found it to be fairly unremarkable. It's got solid design and I like the visuals quite a lot, but I like the awkward platforming over slippery terrain a little less. Crowd Cradle Zone, fuck this place. A bunch of overly precise platforming, annoying turrets, and flying enemies that knock you off into bottomless pits. It's just a mess. Lava Rock Zone, this one just confused me. It was very, very poorly received, scoring a 0.74, but this level is just so peculiar. It starts as a red volcano themed level, but then transitions into Egg Rock Zone terrain and gimmicks. There's little in the way of consistency or creative thought put into the hazards. Yeah, it's pretty bad. The match division was actually not too bad here, with a good amount of high scoring levels to look at. Not that the lower end levels aren't of interest either, like VG Disco by Brawl. This one was funny. It uses assets from the hidden Egg Rock Zone Act 2 disco room and is set inside a pyramid. Anyone up for Dancing with Pharaohs? Crystalline Caves by Sphere scored a strong 7.22 thanks to its good layout and gameplay. Lush Forest Zone by Blade and Silver Canyon Zone by Coatrack also garnered strong scores of over 7.0. Remember these three names, you'll be hearing them a lot in the future. They ultimately all fell in a pretty close race to Mystic's Frost Column Zone, another ice-themed level which is pretty cool. It was later added to the game as an official match map in 2.0.5. Silver Canyon Zone was added to the match map selection in 2.1, although it would later be removed, while Frost Columns is still in SRB2 as recently as 2.2. Metropolis Madness Zone by Fickleheart won the CTF division with a 7.60, being the only map of note in the division for me. The Circuit division was won by Blade's Crimson Cave Zone with a 7.22. I didn't mind this one, it's pretty neat. I also liked Digital Dimension Zone by Sonic Master a fair amount, even if it isn't exactly accurate to the Sonic Riders level I presume its name was based on. Of course, the biggest standout level was not a Thokfest zone. This level was a tongue-in-cheek joke made at the expense of the community based primarily on their perception of the race game mode. Many users mocked circuit maps for being quote-unquote Thokfests. That is, levels with rudimentary layouts that overly emphasize using Sonic and spamming the shit out of the jump button to use his speed Thok. Not a Thokfest, as a result, is designed to not allow you to do this. It takes place across a set of pillars with springs on them. The water below will teleport you back to the springs, so you better get your timing down to pass the obstacles here. The humor is beyond me since I obviously wasn't involved in the SRB2 community at this time, but the level is actually a pretty good time. So, recall those three users I mentioned before, Coatrack, Blade, and Sphere. Blade in particular had already submitted a few maps to prior OLDCs that garnered strong praise, but for the next 3 years of the OLDC, they would begin an era of absolute domination. An innumerable amount of winning maps between 2010 and 2012 were either created by one of these three, or was a collaborative map that at least 2 of them had worked on together. In fact, all 4 of the winning maps across all 4 divisions for the first competition of 2010 would have at least one of their names attached. Funnily enough, all 3 of them are also a part of Sonic Team Junior, the developers of SRB2. Kotak and Blade would join during the procession of the January-February 2010 OLDC, while Sphere would join later, and this string of OLDC wins would prove why. Getting back into the contest themselves, the first OLDC of 2010 suffered a small drop in submissions, going from November-December 2009's 34 to 23, although this obviously isn't so bad in the grand scheme of things. The number of maps across the divisions is also pretty balanced too, which is good for my sake. This OLDC's single-player division was pretty underwhelming outside of the winner. Some of these levels are weird. Rain-Soaked Ridge at first seems like it has real expansive level design and I love how it looks, but then I figured out you can beat it in just like 10 seconds. Mountain Fortress Zone forces you to play as Sonic, which is a pretty lazy way of circumventing the conventional advantages Knuckles and Tails have in levels like this, where the entire challenge is an incredibly precise jumps over bottomless pits. Gianna Dream Blast is solid, but the concept is real strange. It uses the Mario mode visuals, but with some tweaks to, I assume, reference the Super Gianna Sisters series. Yeah, that series that started off as a Mario ripoff, featuring female versions of the Mario Brothers. Odd, but the level is decent. The winner of the division was Egg Mansion Zone Act 1 by Kotak with a 7.76. It was actually a remake of the level with the same name from the March-April 2009 OLDC, and believe it or not, it wasn't even the last time he would remake the level. This is a very strong remake. The original Egg Mansion Zone, while pretty polished and fun to play through, was very bland visually, and the 2010 remake gives it a massive facelift, with some new gameplay gimmicks to spice it up. My only major issue with this level is the text blurb that tells you how to get through a seemingly impassable room. It stays on screen for a little too long, which can get very irritating. Oh yeah, there was also Buzzard Bay Zone, which can't even be played unless you load it through an SRB2 map editor. The 0.85 score it got reflects this, as well as the low quality of the stage itself. The match division was nice because of the varied visuals and themes the levels used, but the scores were all pretty mediocre. Neo Green Lake Zone by Scissor 3000, the lowest scoring level, got a 3.58, and everything above it wasn't received much warmer. I suppose that doesn't mean they were all terrible. Frost Forest Zone, made by Fickleheart and Krabs, got a 6.77 and manages to be very distinct compared to a lot of prior ice-themed match levels. I also liked Land of Light and Rain by Errol, even if the design was kinda bland. The winner of the division was Acid Plant Zone by Kotak with a 7 even score. The level having anti-gravity made me question that high score, but then I remembered that being in first person in SRB2 flips the camera, so it's not as bad as it seems, thankfully. Cool level overall, I liked it quite a bit. The CTF division was won by Sunkissed Fall Zone, a collaborative map made by Sphere and Blade, and it scored a 6.09. Despite this relatively mediocre score, the other levels were received just as average. Upload Download Zone by Fopplefan scored a 5.46, Night Shrine Zone by Hypernux got a 5.0, and Cold Lava Cliff Zone by Krabs and Blah Blah Ball got a 5.0 as well. The only outlier was Ariel Skyfort with a 2.41. Yes, Ariel, not Ariel. I guess it's named after the font. Sunkissed Fall Zone was later added to the game as an official CTF map in 2.1, but it was removed when 2.2 was released. The Circuit Division was won by Blade's Thunder Factory Zone with a 7.87. The March-April 2010 OLDC was noted for having a weaker than usual match and CTF divisions, with a lot of levels scoring poorly. The winner of the match division was Aquatic Relic Zone by Sphere, which scored a 6.42. Many of the other levels that scored even lower were noted for being weak in terms of layout and concept. One of the match submissions was Complete Chaos Zone, which stood out for different reasons. This level is a 60-minute rush job. That's not an insult I came up with, it's literally text that the level opens up with. Indicative of the short time it took to create, the stage has no power-up rings, a very simple layout, and visuals inspired by the pre-2.0 special stages. The CTF division similarly suffered from low scores across the board, although the winner was actually quite highly acclaimed. Contrasting most small and simple CTF maps, Clock Tower Zone by Kotak and Sphere is an absolutely massive level with a pretty complex layout. It's tough to navigate, but makes up for it with pretty unique and varied gameplay, according to the voters. It won with a 7.62 and was added to the game as an official CTF map in Demo 2.1. The Circuit Division also had a few stinkers, with City Jump Zone and Green Hill Zone both garnering pretty pathetic scores of 0.53 and 1.76 in particular. But as the pattern for this OLDC would suggest, there were some shining levels as well. Egg Hall Zone by Blade was received pretty well. It's short but fun and has some fun gimmicks. The winner of the division was Fawful-Fan's Wacky Tesseract Zone with a 7.60. This map is pretty tight. It's got a fun layout, has some neat obstacles, and it even has some cool 2D mode sections. So, the single player division. There are two submissions here which defined this entire 2 months for me. The first is Detonation Drift by Fickleheart. This level is a blast. It's long as shit, full of different gimmicks and platforming challenges, very difficult, and most importantly, it's chock full of alternate paths that take advantage of all 3 different characters' properties. My only issue is that it's fairly unforgiving. Many of the gimmicks punish you for messing up with death, which isn't a super fun sensation in a long level. It's still a ton of fun though. The other standout level was Molten Cavern Zone by Chrome. It has a similar theme, but trades the difficulty and ingenuity of Detonation Drift for some more grounded obstacles. I prefer Detonation Drift, if only because of the greater amount of paths and challenge, but both levels are very excellent, some of my favorites to originate from the OLDC so far. Detonation Drift scored a 7.05, while Molten Core Zone won with a 7.40, a fairly close run, although Detonation Drift's score was slightly hurt by a few low ratings from people who couldn't play it due to lag. 2010 computers will do that. Still, 2 great efforts from Fickleheart and Chrome. May-June 2010 unfortunately continued the whole not that great theme of the OLDC. Never mind the small number of maps submitted for each division, the quality of these stages definitely left something to be desired. After a very strong single-player division in March-April, this one was a pretty big letdown. Buzzard's Bay Zone is an attempt to amend the flaws of the previously unplayable stage of the same name from the January-February 2010 OLDC, but even if this one is actually playable, that doesn't stop it from being woefully bland and unmemorable, and not to mention, short as hell. I didn't care for Dangerous Volcano Zone by Internet Explorer, not the overly cheap rising lava that gives you no time to actually figure out what to do, and definitely not the ungodly boring 30-second intro you're forced to sit through when you begin the level. Starlit City Zone and Metropolis Sprint use similar assets, and they're both pretty generic, and I couldn't even play Cyber Gauntlet Zone at all for some reason. That just leaves the winner of the division, Canyon Operation by Comrant. It's okay. This map's strong points include a unique theme that sort of merges Arid Canyon Zone and Techno Hill Zone, and a fairly solid layout. But it suffers in regards to being somewhat confusing to navigate and not really having any defining gimmicks. Overall, a pretty weak crop of stages. The Match Division's winner was one of the most unique stages to be submitted so far, Diamond Blizzard Zone by Sphere. It's a pretty big level with multiple vertical layers, it's got a lot of horizontal space in those layers, and it's got tons of hidden shit in all kinds of nooks and crannies. Very good stage that earned its 7.88 score and was added to the official match map selection in Demo 2.1. The other 3 match maps don't really deserve mention. The CTF and Circuit divisions were actually both pretty close. For CTF, aside from the low-scoring Climate Chaos Zone, all 3 of the other submissions were fairly close throughout the division. Freezing Flame Zone by Fickleheart, Wellspring Keep Zone by Mascara Snake and Wellfast, and Radiant Cavern Zone by Sphere and Kovac. Radiant Cavern ultimately won with a 6.69, but it was pretty close. The Circuit division was even closer, with Tidal Cave Zone by Krabs and Fickleheart and Iron Aquarium Zone by Zap610. I didn't really enjoy either map more than moderately, but they fought a very close battle that ended with Tidal Cave Zone winning with a margin of 0.07 points. Radiant Cavern Zone was added to the official CTF map rotation in Demo 2.1, but was removed after 2.2's release. Thankfully, July-August 2010 was a return to form for both the match and single-player divisions. While the scores across the board weren't that much better, I think for single-player at least, the selection was definitely an improvement. This was probably the first time in a while where I actually enjoyed every submission in the single-player division. Oh sure, they weren't all that great, but I had fun. I liked Lava Reef Zone's music, and the multiple character paths were pretty cool. Seems like Fire and SRB2 is some kind of winning combination, because cool lava stages have been a trend so far for 2010. I also really liked Golden Palace Zone. It uses custom graphics, it's got a fair amount of gimmicks, and it's very long. The only problem I have is that the boss at the end kind of messes with the pace. Although I enjoyed these stages, they weren't received very well by the community. Golden Palace got a 5.79 and Lava Reef got a 3.28. Damn. The winner of the division was Sapphire Coast Zone Act 1 by Blade with an 8.37. Personally, I don't know if I was impressed with it enough to agree with the score. It's a remake of the level with the same name from the November-December 2007 OLDC, and it improved on its original score of 6.91. The match division was fairly standard for the OLDC, albeit with one standout, which was the winner, Sparkling City Zone by Fred. I've seen plenty of city stages so far, but this one has unique elements to it to give it a sort of small town vibe. Fountains, parks, construction sites, and even a giant monitor that only displays Sonic's head. I loved the atmosphere here. It scored an 8.63. For CTF, it was a pretty close race between Spaceport Warfare by Coatrack and Spear and Slime Stronghold Zone by Fickleheart. These two levels are both pretty inventive with their setting and some of their gimmicks, although Spaceport Warfare's expansive design is a bit too confusing in my opinion. Slime Stronghold scored a 6.22, while Spaceport Warfare won the division with a 6.50. Disrepaired Sanctuary Zone by Mock and Flood Force Zone by Glaber scored a 2.89 and a 2.60 respectively. The circuit division was honestly pretty weak this time around. Almost every track here is pretty flat, simple, and offers little in the way of obstacles that aren't just plain platforming gimmicks that wouldn't be out of place in any standard single-player stage. The one level that actually stood out for all the wrong reasons here is Supersonic Starway Zone by Fickleheart. This level has a very unique concept. This entire race requires you to complete it as supersonic. You start as the guy, and the stage is littered with rings to keep you in super form, otherwise you'll find yourself taking unavoidable damage until death. Never mind the obvious ways that this concept fails, it also has a lot of irritating sections where you need to use supersonics floating. It sounds like a cool idea, but maybe not a great idea in execution. Incidentally, after a pretty consistently high number of submissions thus far, the next OLDC of 2010, taking place over September and October, saw a shocking drop. 9 entries, the lowest amount of any OLDC since 2005. The low turnout wasn't even absolved by an extended submission period, since many of the additional maps submitted were deemed of too low quality. It doesn't exactly help that almost all of these 9 maps were considered to be quite subpar. The single-player division had 3 submissions, and they're all shit. Well, okay, they're not bad, but man are they bland. Medieval Zone is another Glaber creation, which of course means it's going to be extraordinarily out of the box visually. Unfortunately, design-wise, it's just a bunch of hallways, and it scored a 2.35. Very boring. Rainy Jungle Zone and the winner of the division, Frosty Flow Zone, aren't much better. They're just so run-of-the-mill. Frosty Flow scored a 3.75, and Rainy Jungle scored a 2.35. Pretty pathetic. The CTF division had the lowest scoring map of any of the divisions, Dead Canyon Zone by a Cat. This stage is just confusing to me because it has sections that are literally impassable while you're holding a flag. The problem is, these sections need to be passed to reach your team or your enemy team's bases, which makes scoring points almost impossible without some ungodly unconventional workarounds. A horribly designed, bland level. It scored a 1.30. I can't say a whole lot for the other 2 maps. They're fine conceptually, but they were voted fairly average for being flat and just not that interesting. Frosted Meadows I appreciate for putting a spin on the constant ice levels with some relatively original aesthetics, while Hideout Hole I appreciate the flat layout. The circuit division only had 1 map which was approved for the contest, so obviously it won its division by default. Stupid Circuit Zone, a joke level, which is funny but also very frustrating to play. The map is set in 0 gravity and forces you to do some platforming, but the jumps required are overly precise to pull off, and 1 lap lasts for fucking ever. It's ridiculous. Good concept, bad execution. The one saving grace was the match division, which had 2 submissions. Digital Forest Zone by Metal Fighter got rated pretty averagely with a 5.14, but Northern Desert Zone by Nightmare Sends and 123 Reunite was the only saving grace of this competition. Scoring a strong 8.14, it was praised as the only good level to have been submitted to this competition. Not a great way to conclude things, and sadly, although things picked up in terms of quantity for the next OLDC, the quality still left a bit to be desired. The November-December 2010 OLDC was still full of some surprises though. The single-player division features one of the best levels I've played yet, Twilight Isles Zone by Thompson. Even at the time, it was considered incredibly ambitious and inventive. This level is all about solving puzzles and it's chock full of tricky platforming. What I really liked is that while the execution of the puzzles is pretty simple, actually solving them and figuring out what to do is extremely tricky. It's great. The only problem I have is that during the hang glider sections, I believe the hang gliders don't respawn, so you're stuck and have to kill yourself if you lose them. This is a great effort though, and it scored a strong 7.53. The match division was actually pretty decent. There were only 4 submissions, but they all scored fairly well except for Orange Stream Zone by Brawl, which got a 3.33. The winner of the division was Settings Sand Zone by Zaro Su, while Celestial Sanctuary Zone, which placed second, was added to the game as an official match map in Demo 2.1. I've got a lot of fond memories of this one from when I did my SRB2 Demo 2.2 review, so it's cool to see where it came from. The CTF division was won by Fickleheart's map, Seaside Strike Zone, with a 6.0. Solid levels overall, so not much to say. The circuit division, for some reason, consisted of 2 2D mode submissions, because I guess someone thought that was a good idea. I have to admit, hearing the name for Disco Dash Zone got me excited, until I played the level. Turrets in a race map. 0.66 score. What more can I say? The winner of the division was Kubal and his map Sunken Cave Zone, which finished with a score of 6.11. The last thing to note about this OLDC is that after the point where the voting was supposed to end, Furious Fox had spontaneously vanished. No one could contact him, and the results of the OLDC were delayed as a result. Taking back his place as the original host, Mystic returned with Prime 2.0 assisting him coming into the next year. With 2011 in tow, the OLDC had a new host and a number of creators continuing to submit their creativity to be judged. Despite the numbers never quite reaching the highs dated in 2010, 2011 was overall a solid year for the OLDC, with more high-quality maps having been submitted than usual and a few familiar levels you might recognize. Let's begin with the January-February 2011 OLDC. Starting from this year, a few rule changes were instated. Most of them revolved around changing how voting works, but also levels were now required to load immediately upon starting a new game, so you wouldn't have to look through multiplayer for them, thank God. This one had pretty weak circuit and match divisions, but at the very least, the single player stuff was much stronger. For the circuit division, there were only 2 submissions. You know, with how small the race selection is and how low quality they've been for the past few years, I have to wonder why they didn't just scrap it at this point. It's pretty clear most people weren't interested in putting effort into circuit maps. Anyway, the 2 stages aren't great. Acid Valley by Miles Knuckles Prower and Sparkling Abyss Zone by Catman are both very short, not very well designed, and overall low quality. The former won with a 3.92 while the latter scored a 3.50. For the match stages, there's only 3, and they all scored fairly low. Cold Cavern Zone is another pretty standard ice level, and God knows I'm sick of them by now, but I actually liked Zoom Ship Zone by Catmint. An airship is a fairly cool thing to attempt within the scope of this competition, but it's pretty cramped and there's some weird obstacles like fans which send you flying to their death. This leaves Rush Flower Zone by Coat Rack, which was created from scratch in 2 hours to win the division with a 5.82. The CTF division featured Misty Mire Zone by Char B Diz, which had broken flag behavior that made it impossible to score more than 1 point. Otherwise, it was a pretty mediocre camp except for the winner, Damp Campus Zone by Fawful Fan. I actually like this level. I've seen sports stadiums, cities, but never a college. It's a cool concept, neat layout, but I have to say maybe it's not the most appropriate place to create a map for a shooter game. I know, it's a cartoony Sonic game and you're throwing rings, not firing bullets, but still, maybe a bit insensitive. So, the single player division. Most of it wasn't that good, but we had 3 maps that managed to score pretty high. The first is another map by Thompson, despite the opening for his last level, Twilight Isle Zone, insisting that he wouldn't make any new levels after that one. Clockwork Grove's Zone seeks to build on the foundation that Twilight Isle set up, taking what worked and elevating it while fixing what didn't. And once again, Thompson managed to knock the ball out of the park. The level features a similar emphasis on platforming and puzzle solving, with even more inventive and out-of-the-box puzzles. Not only are they way more intuitive than Twilight Isles, but the solutions to the puzzles aren't always surrounded by death pits, so failing in your execution isn't as punishing. The only problem is that, like Twilight Isles, the navigation isn't always obvious. A few sections require you to break glass to progress, but there's nothing to suggest doing that. It's not super hard to figure out, but maybe a crack on the graphics would have made it more obvious. Splash Garden Zone by Blade is another 2D level. It's solid, with some fun gimmicks and a pretty good layout. Both levels scored over a 7, but Clockwork Grove won the division with a 7.76. Wonder Terrace Zone by BlazeFan1 is also pretty decent. It's got a real inventive concept with lots of varied obstacles and themes. The only problem is, figuring out how to progress through some of these rooms is not always easy, and there's a lack of checkpoints that often forces you to redo large amounts of sections should you die. March-April 2011. This was a pretty weak OLDC overall. Almost all the entries here were rushed or joke levels, and only 4 out of the 12 maps submitted scored over a 5, which is pretty fucking miserable. The single-player division consisted of 2 maps, both of which were, not good. Outer Space Threat Zone by Miles Knuckles Prower is a boss level. Let's see. The boss is too high to hit. The red pillar kills you in 1 hit. What the hell am I supposed to do here, you ask? Well, I just walked away and played the other level, Lakeside Hill Zone. This one just screams rushed. One of the most appreciable things about the OLDC thus far is the large amount of unique level design concepts. Be they new ideas for platforming challenges or incredibly creative themes and settings, it makes even the worst of levels easier to stomach. So that's why a level like Lakeside Hill, which is just a blander version of Greenflower Zone Act 1, is even more disappointing than it would normally be. What do I even say about it? It's fucking lame, and the score of 1.81 makes it the lowest scoring winner in the entire history of the OLDC. The match division was chock full of joke levels that weren't received very well. Despite this, there's 2 that I actually liked. Accursed Donut.wad by Char D Bis is a cool concept. You're essentially fighting on 2 giant donuts in a cup of milk. It's a neat idea, even if the layout wasn't liked by many. Zero Effort Flower Zone Act 12 by Dude64 is hilarious purely because of the aesthetics. It combines Greenflower Zone, the most pure and innocent grassland stage imaginable, with the outer space background of Egg Rock Zone. It's such a jarring mixture that it ends up being really funny. It scored a 5.45, which actually secured its second place. The first place winner in the match division was Egg Hangar Zone by Coat Rack and Sphere, far and away agreed to be the best level in the division. Large, lots of space, tons of different rooms with different obstacles, it's great. This map was added to the map selection in Demo 2.1, and I remember playing quite a lot of it in both 2.1 and 2.2, and I can concur that it's an absolute banger of a match map. The CTF division was won by Mossy Mushroom Zone by Fickleheart with a 6.36, and the Circuit division was won by Lost Feelings Island Zone by Internet Explorer. It's a pretty fun romp with some varied obstacles, and funnily enough, it scored a 7.33, the highest score of any division winner for this OLDC. After how weak March-April 2011 was, I'm happy to report that the rest of 2011 was a big improvement over those 2 months. May-June 2011 single-player division had some outstanding maps, and the winner of the division will likely be familiar to anyone who's played 2.2. It's Frozen Hillside Zone. This level is a secret unlockable from 2.2, which was added to the game in that demo. Obviously, it's far from the first OLDC winner to be added to the game as an official level, but it is the first single-player level. I love this place, and it's so cool to be able to see where it originated from. The gimmick of snow that lowers your jump height is present here, and it's pretty surprising to see how much the level changed between its debut in 2011 and its implementation into the game in 2019. It was highly praised during the voting process and won with an 8.84 score. It's not the only good level to be submitted here, though. Sparkling Ice Cap Zone is another creation from Thompson, and it carries many of the trademarks that his 2 previous creations, Twilight Isle and Clockwork Grove, did. Very long and varied, lots of puzzles, and progression is often locked behind many long sequences of challenges. It's a quality level, undoubtedly, but I had my fair share of issues. For the 3rd time in a row, Thompson's highly articulate, puzzle-based levels are still fun, but the novelty is starting to lose its luster a bit. There were some puzzles here that were seriously ambiguous to figure out, like these ice blocks which I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how to break. This is an issue that Thompson's other levels had, and it's starting to get a bit irritating encountering them for the 3rd time in a row. The good does outweigh the bad here, but this was the first Thompson level where I can say it didn't blow everything else out of the water, due both to the quality of the division itself and the level's own flaws. I also enjoyed Stronghold Forest Zone by Coat Rack. The forest theme and Castle Eggman inspired hazards remind me of Forest Fortress Zone from 2.2, and it's pretty fun and varied in its hazards. The custom enemies were a nice touch too. There was also a level called Waterway Ruin Zone. It was solid, but it didn't load when starting a new game, so it was disqualified. The match division was fuck. It counts as an adjective here. Let's see, we've got Flux Satellite Zone, a wonky anti-gravity level, Ares City Zone, which was disqualified for being classed in the wrong game type, Southern Sands, which is a pretty generic desert level, and Frozen Tundra, which is an overly vertical ice level. This leaves us with Ponies Suck Zone by Fawfulfan. This was a joke level. What the joke was supposed to be escapes me, but the level was able to win its division with a 4.39. Damn. The CTF division was actually pretty good. There were only 4 levels, but they all scored fairly well, with the weakest one, Frozen Pass Zone by Kubal, scoring a 5.22. I liked Majestic Grove Zone. It's fucking huge, so actually getting to the bases takes a bit, but the idea of a gargantuan CTF level is pretty neat. They won the division with a 7.06 score. The continually neglected Circuit division was once again supported by only 2 maps. The winning map was Frozen Hall Zone by Metal Fighter with a 5.60. Someone please put this division out of its misery. The July-August 2011 OLDC was an even stronger showing for every division, including another single-player map which debuted from the OLDC. Pipe Tower Zone by Fawfulfan scored an 8.19, securing 2nd place. The stage uses the Mario assets from SRB2's then official Mario-themed level, Mario Goomba Blast, and creates a more comprehensive experience out of them. It's fun. I love the use of the overworld and underworld theme. The fire flowers are a great touch, and it looks wonderful. Good job. The rest of the single-player levels are quite good as well. I really enjoyed Red House Zone. It cycles between Greenflower Zone, Arid Canyon Zone, and a unique theme taking place inside the Red House, which is somehow way bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. But, okay, time to discuss the winner of this division. I think the best way to set the tone is to read off the name of this level. Sonic Dumb Venture Volume 1, Donkey Kraken's Disastrous Quest. Yeah. This level is ridiculous. It's ludicrous. What can I even fucking say? This level, created by Dude64, consists of numerous small, unfinished level segments which were combined and tied together by the world's most absurd story, which revolves around Sonic running around and collecting shit to stop the main villain, Donkey Kraken. This creature's motivation for harassing Sonic? To eat the year 2006. He's also a custom boss that the level ends on, and what the fuck is this? It's so goddamn insane that you have to appreciate how it completely takes the piss out of just about every trope of level design and storytelling that it possibly could. This isn't just a stage to play, it's an experience, one you really have to play for yourself to understand just how much sheer entertainment it creates. The level finished the competition with a 9.58, thanks to the abundance of perfect scores it received, and was the highest single-player stage of the 2.0 era of the OLDC. All I can say is it rocks. Match maps are pretty much split down the middle, with 3 of them receiving very high scores while the other 4 underperformed quite badly. Among the highly rated stages, I liked Jello Factory by Charby Dis, which is a really cool idea with some fun gimmicks involving bouncing jello. The winner of the division was Storm Stronghold Zone, which was created by a 4-man team of Fickleheart, Spear, Mascara Snake, and Errol. God damn, no wonder it managed to win the division. Of course it's going to be the highest quality level with 4 people working on it. Great level though. I like the combination of the castle setting with the forest, it's cool. Storm Stronghold Zone scored an 8.78. The CTF division was relatively small, with only 4 maps and 1 clear winner. Galactic Waterworks Zone by Spear, which is pretty large and also very intricate. The real best level though is Lethal Filibuster Zone by Fawful. Filibuster, as in the political procedure. I suppose it's not shocking to see this idea coming from the guy who made a fucking CTF map in a college campus, but the idea is hilarious enough for me to give it my praise. Circuit only had 1 submitted level. Now the level, made by Fawful, is actually solid. Girder Detour scored a 7.0 and has a pretty unique theme, rehashing Arid Canyon Zone's desert theme and blending it with some construction site visuals. But ultimately, it doesn't stand out much in terms of the actual layout. Of course, it won the division by default since there was no competition. So after May, June, and July, August, 2 of the best OLDCs so far in terms of quality levels, we end on 2 that were actually quite weak. September, October 2011 had a small turnout with a paltry 10 submissions. Thankfully, there's at least some decent material here, and surprisingly, the only division that was really underwhelming was the usually solid CTF division. Arctic Facility Zone, a rather subpar ice factory level created by Kubal, won with a 5.20. The other 2 levels were something else. Uninspired Name Zone was unfinished upon being submitted, which kinda confuses me because it was a result of a 3-way collab between Scissor 3000, Coat Rack, and Sims Magic, who have all shown that they can create very good multiplayer maps. The unfinished nature shows in the visuals and odd layout, as well as the fact that it can occasionally crash the game due to coding defects. The final level in the division is the map with no name, and no gravity either. This anti-gravity gimmick and unorthodox layout proved to be pretty controversial. Some people disliked it, and rightfully so, but others praised the inventive nature of the level. In the end though, the low votes outweighed those from people who liked it, and it ended with a 3.25 score. There were only 2 single-player maps and 2 match maps, and both selections had quite large differences in quality. For single-player, Mario Land 1-1 by Sims Magic, a 30-second 2D level that's about as barren as you could get, went up against Chemical Facility Zone, a pretty damn solid creation by Coat Rack. The latter won with an 8.30, the former got a 4.25. In match, the winner was Egg Match Shin Zone by Coat Rack, which took the visuals and layout of Egg Mansion Zone from the January-February 2011 OLDC and made it into a great match stage. The runner-up by default map in the match division was Magma Temple Zone with a 4.80. Shockingly, the circuit division managed to be pretty solid this time around, other than Fickleheart's joke submission. Obnoxious Mim Little Pony reference Zone was submitted as a purposefully awful and unplayable map, and its score of 0.25 reflects this. Yeah, it's obviously shitty, and it prompted the creation of a rule to bar levels that were purposefully bad from being submitted. Otherwise, the other 2 circuit maps were pretty bland. So, the final OLDC of 2011 began in November, and oh! Look at that! After consistently having low amounts of submissions, not to mention waning interest in the game type, Mystic announced that the November-December 2011 OLDC would be the final contest to feature a circuit division. It appears that this was enough to spark interest in map creators for the game type, and for the circuit division's farewell tour, it ended up being the division with the most entries. Not a very strong goodbye though, as many of these levels were rated quite low for me, subpar. Aphotic City and Hot Chocolate Manor have way too much needless jumping and platforming. The end of Circuit Zone is kind of ugly, and joins the likes of Mountainside Green Zone and some others for just being a really bland collection of hallways. The biggest problem stage for me was Requiem for a Soul, where one lap can last for almost 2 fucking minutes, without much substance to justify the extreme length. I did sort of like Black Magic Workshop by Internet Explorer for the incredibly creepy and creative theme, although I think it would have worked better as a single player stage, since there are points where you have to deal with a timer, which is finicky at best in a level meant for racing. The winner of the division was Castle Land Zone by Eternally Aries Red X with a 5.83. The rest of this OLDC was pretty mediocre, although interestingly enough, the other 3 divisions were all won by stages submitted by the same user, Zaro Su. Maple Lake Zone for match, Running Special Stage Zone for single player, and Spacebound Fortress Zone for CTF. All 3 levels also scored over a 7, which is pretty cool. 2011, in retrospect, was a damn solid year for the OLDC. Sure, the numbers may not have been great, but there were so many strong stages in just about every division. With Circuit, the only division to consistently underwhelm, being retired after 2011, the future for the OLDC seemed quite bright. Clearly, something went wrong here. The continuing downward spiral of both the quantity and quality of OLDC submissions only seemed to get worse and worse, and the next 3 years of the OLDC were pitiful to say the least. Starting fresh in January-February 2012, a slightly lower turnout this time shouldn't seem that odd considering the removal of the Circuit division, but perhaps even this is a bit too drastic of a drop. The January-February 2012 OLDC had 8 entries, and unfortunately, not many of them were very good to at least make up for the disquieting numbers. The match division for this OLDC consisted of extremely low quality creations, and CTF wasn't much better. There are 4 match maps, none of which are defined by their positive attributes. Pac-Man by Eternally Aries Red X is very strange. Its inspiration is obvious, but it's comprised entirely of hallways, and I just don't get the idea of making a match map based on Pac-Man. Euler Outpost by Catman. I kinda like the idea, a convergence of Egg Rock Zone and Arid Canyon Zone to create sort of a space canyon aesthetic. It's cool. What isn't cool is what the majority of voters spent the bulk of their reviews complaining about: the instant kill oil puddles, the cramped layout, and the bad weapon placement. Generic Field Zone by CSMGIW. You know, making a generic map and giving it a self-aware title to acknowledge that it is indeed generic doesn't automatically invalidate the fact that it's generic. These submissions' poor scores, the highest of which was Pac-Man with a 3.64, left the winner of the division to be yet another level that was rushed to completion in 2 hours, Techno Rush Zone by Coat Rack, which scored a middling 5.89. The CTF division only had 2 maps, both of which were received decently well, I guess. Most people agreed that Jungle Rush by Kuba 11 was quite stunning visually, but way too cluttered gameplay-wise, while Rush Flower Zone by Sphere and Coat Rack had those same qualities, reversed. Great layout, but bland visuals. Jungle Rush scored a 4.78, leaving Rush Flower Zone to win with a 6.86. So it's clear that single player was once again the hero of this disgrace. Blade and Coat Rack both submitted sequels for levels that had won the single player division in prior OLDCs, and these levels fought an extremely close battle for the crown. Sapphire Coast Zone Act 2 and Egg Mansion Zone Act 2 are both very high quality levels with very polished visuals, and they highlight the idiosyncrasies of their creators perfectly. Egg Mansion Zone is a consistently tricky level with tons of gimmicks and puzzles to leave you scratching your head. It's not just a standard platforming affair, you're gonna have to use your brain for some of these portions. Sapphire Coast Zone Act 2 on the other hand is extremely similar to the first act and many of Blade's other levels. Wide open, gorgeous environments, tons of paths and secrets to find. It's a simple level at first, but it also opens up tremendously once you play through it multiple times. The race for first place between both of these levels was extremely close. Both received multiple high scores, but while Egg Mansion was in the lead for quite some time, a few pivotal votes near the end let Sapphire Coast Zone take the lead and win the division with an 8.24, a 0.08 score margin between it and Egg Mansion. Close one. Sapphire Coast Zone was never added to SRB2 officially, but it did introduce an enemy that would debut in SRB2 officially with Demo 2.1, the Spring Shell. These robots with springs on their back appear in Techno Hill Zone, but they made their first ever appearance in an OLDC level, which is pretty fucking cool. Wow. That's it, huh? March-April 2012's OLDC? I don't even know what to say. All the issues that the OLDC had been having since mid-2010, low number of entries, bad entries by amateur creators, and rushed levels made hours before the submission period ended, they all came to a head with March-April 2012. 5 entries was all that could be mustered for this OLDC, the lowest amount of any of these contests since fucking 2004. On top of this, there were no single-player submissions whatsoever. The match division consisted of 2 extremely low-quality and poorly made maps, City Match Zone by Root, which scored a 1.0, and Hexagon Heat Zone by Sims Magic, which won the division with a 3.80. The CTF division was slightly better, as 2 maps here, Adjective Noun Zone by Scissor 3000 and the Sacred Cradle by Eternally Aries Red X, scored slightly above average scores. But goddamn, after so many problems with this community effort, it seemed to have reached its breaking point, and the lack of conceivable effort being put into OLDC levels was becoming too big of an issue not to address. On April 30th, 2012, Mystic put out a forum post announcing the potential cancellation of the OLDC until the release of the next version of SRB2, citing low entry numbers and the lack of quality maps, and using the upcoming May-June 2012 OLDC as a condition. If this contest didn't attract enough high-quality entries, the cancellation would go through. When Mystic put out a call to action, the community answered. With 10 entries in a strong single-player division, the May-June 2012 OLDC was seen as a big improvement over the last. The quality is consistent across the single-player maps, and every creator here put in a strong effort to make something great, with only Industrial Valley Zone by Zipper getting a low score of 4.58. Lightless Labyrinth Zone by Shadowhog was the most polarizing level in the entire contest. This is an incredibly unique map. It takes place entirely in the dark, with only small spotlights to guide you. As the name would suggest, it's also a fucking maze, with only rings to tell you where to go. The only major issue I had is the random crusher areas that are pretty hard to navigate because of the darkness. Otherwise, it's a cool concept that was executed well, and the Earthworm Jim 2 music only adds to the appeal. Sonic's Schoolhouse, what a fucking odd level this is. The level's author, BoinCL, is known for creating SRB2 Sweet Bro and Hella Jeff, an amazing shitpost of a level pack, so it seems appropriate that such a mind would create one of the strangest OLDC levels I've seen yet. It's based entirely on the game Sonic's Schoolhouse, and as expected for a level themed after an educational game, it'll test your brain more than your hands. I've seen a lot of weird ideas in these levels, but I was not expecting to play a level that forces you to complete math equations just to progress. Unfortunately, the level wasn't received particularly well. Its charming and funny concept were overshadowed by the short length and lack of substance, and its mediocre score left it as the second lowest placing level. Chemical Facility Zone Act 2 and Frozen Hillside Zone Act 2 were sequels to levels previously created by Coat Rack and Blade respectively, although the reception for these levels definitely didn't live up to how highly praised the first acts were. Chemical Facility Zone Act 2 suffered from cheap enemy placement and some pretty poorly thought out level design, not to mention fucking anti-gravity. As for Frozen Hillside Act 2, it's not bad, but I think compared to the original, it's more generic. The wide open space has gone for more traditional structure, but the original definitely used the jump height crippling snow to better effect. Not to say that Act 2 was bad, but I don't think it had the same impact as the first. The winner of this single-player division was Azure Temple Zone by Mystic and Prime 2.0, which was entered as a preview to 2.1, where it made its official SRB2 debut as a hidden challenge stage. The level is just as it is in 2.1. That is to say, it's hard as fuck. Completely submerged underwater, tons of precise platforming, the enemies are always on your ass, and puzzles that require quick wits and good timing. If you played it in 2.1 or 2.2, you'll be happy to know that it's just as hard debuting in the OLDC as it is now. The Match and CTF divisions only had one poorly received level, Green Match Zone by Root, which got a 1.81 and was panned for a lack of rings and using translucent water to hide bottomless pits. The other map in the Match division was Marble Zone by Coat Rack, obviously inspired by the zone from the original Sonic the Hedgehog game on Genesis. From the lava and the pistons to the purple blocks, it's got it all and it was praised for its layout, scoring an 8.27. The CTF division also only had two maps, Fungus Forest by Fickleheart and Glades of Serenity by Scissor 3000. They've got similar themes and visuals, and funnily enough, the two level scores resulted in a tie. They both won the division with a 6.55, the second OLDC to have the division end in a tie, and the first time it happened with CTF. So after a remarkably solid showing this OLDC, it seemed like things were looking up. The July-August 2012 OLDC was kickstarted with the announcement of a new voting system. For the past decade, the voting system had worked on a basis of simple ratings. Voters would score every level from 0 to 10, and those numbers were tallied and averaged. The level with the highest average would be awarded the win, but the system had a number of issues that Mystic seek to address. Chief among them was how outlying votes could heavily skew a level's score, which would result in levels losing or winning because of just one or two votes. The new voting system would simply have people ranking the maps. The maps would then receive points based on the amount of levels in the division and their ranking. It was overall seen as an improvement, but it was never used in the July-August 2012 OLDC because it never happened. Due to a lack of entries, the July-August 2012 OLDC was cancelled. So was the September-October 2012 OLDC. With so little entries to work with, Mystic's final decision was to commence the November-December 2012 OLDC after receiving entries from July to October and extend the voting period for the November-December 2012 OLDC. The OLDC itself was the first to use the new voting system, and it had 14 entries, none of which were particularly good or worthy of praise. The single-player division was full of very flawed levels. Neo Canyon Zone, the winner of the division made by Chrome, and Mad Gadget Zone, made by Sims Magic and Kiarasin, which got second place overall, were both submitted in an unfinished state, while most other levels are either badly designed or just boring. The worst of it, Egg Slimer Battle Zone, is just the Egg Slimer boss from Techno Hill Zone Act 3 given spike balls and placed in a different area. The match division was a close race between three levels, Generic Canyon Zone, Volcano Valley Zone, and Match Meadow Zone. They were considered okay, but nothing worth getting super hyped about. The only submission that stood out was the lowest rated map in the CTF division, Mount Revolvius by Eblo. Unlike most CTF maps where the layout is symmetrical to make it as fair as possible, Mount Revolvius is designed in a way that gives the blue team quite a blatant advantage. Whereas the blue team's base is located at the top of the mountain, the red team's is at the bottom, essentially forcing them to climb up to collect the blue team's flag, while the blue team has a much easier time. It was considered way too balanced and not very well made. So, that was it. The final OLDC of 2012 ended not with a bang, but with a small fart. In February 2013, after the OLDC had subsequently ended, Mystic announced that the OLDC would be going on hiatus until the release of the next version of SRB2, version 2.1, which seemed more like a myth than a tangible goal at this point. So, 2013 went by with no OLDCs. After being encrypted in the community for a number of years, the fabled version 2.1 update eventually did come out in March of 2014. This new version was a massive update for the game, namely by means of updating the single-player campaign stages and bosses. This facelift managed to spark a large amount of interest in the community for the OLDC to recommence for May and June of 2014. And lord, what a fucking return. This OLDC has probably the best single-player division I've seen so far, good Christ. There's not a single poorly made or rushed level. Everything here was made with love, care, and purpose. And even the stages that scored low during the contest are still very solid. The top 4 of this OLDC were some of the best SRB2 stages I've ever played, and they were all lauded for their high quality. Seraphic Skyland Zone by Sphere. This level was in the works for 3 years, and my god, this has to be the single most gorgeous level I've ever seen in SRB2. Level design wise, it's pretty fun too, if a little basic. Glacier Gear Zone was the first OLDC submission by the user Toaster, and what a first impression. Out of the top 4, this is easily my favorite to play. First of all, amongst the dozens of generic ice levels I've seen, it finally presents a unique and fresh use of both ice level gimmicks and aesthetics. It's long and varied, has a unique enemy, great 2D sections. What more could you ask for? It's stupendous, it really is. Sand Valley Zone by Chrome is also very long and full of unique and fresh takes on its main defining level gimmick, Quicksand. It was originally made during the 2.0 era, but Chrome pushed it back, which was good as 2.1 made adjustments to the Quicksand physics that made the level supposedly more fun to play. It's solid, but I'm not a huge fan of some things, namely the enemy placement and some sections that cause camera issues. Finally, there's Clock Tower Zone, a solid 2D level. The camera dynamically moves as you progress, but it's a bit shaky and kinda disorienting. Still, I appreciate the effort to make something so visually distinct. All 4 of these levels ended the contest with scores of over 300, and Seraphic Skyland Zone ultimately took home the gold with a 424 score. Well deserved. The other levels are still solid. I enjoyed Egg Outpost Zone and Floral Road Zone, even if they were a degree more bland and not as memorable as the top 4. The only level that sort of made me raise an eyebrow was Midnight Cave Zone, which has some pretty bad navigation. Still, this was an insanely good single-player selection to start things off right away. As far as the 2 multiplayer divisions, well, they remain neglected as you'd expect, with far less entries and little in the way of substance or worth. I like Climate Chaos Zone, the winner of the match division. It's got a cool gimmick, but most voters disliked how constantly changing the conditions of the stage would make gameplay wildly inconsistent. Crystal Coast Zone managed to score a 0, ending up last in its division and in every single voter's ranking. The CTF division didn't fare much better. Forbidden Woods Zone by the Cyan won with a 67, but most of the levels were also criticized. Still, despite the weak multiplayer divisions, you couldn't deny that it was a return to form in more ways than not. July-August 2014's OLDC once again featured a weak set of match and CTF levels and a unique and controversial set of single-player stages. However, even though the quality of the division didn't compare to the May-June 2014 OLDC, I at least appreciate that all these levels were unique and still had a stamp of quality. There's nothing that's rushed or bad, just a bunch of inventive levels that either worked well or didn't work at all. First off, the one level that immediately piqued my interest, Quickman. This level comes with a total conversion of the SRB2 gameplay into Mega Man. Now, far be it from me to give a totally unbiased opinion on this level. Compared to most voters who found it to be pretty bad, I actually liked the idea and I think the controls work suitably well. The biggest issue, in my opinion, is the fact that you can't shoot. Without the ability to use the Mega Buster, you have to jump over enemies, which is easier said than done with Mega Man's limited mobility and health. The concept here was good, but within the limitations of the engine, it just doesn't work. Cloud Convoy Zone by Toaster is the other submission that totally changes the gameplay style to replicate Sky Chase Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on the Genesis. Sonic has the homing attack and he's constantly being followed by a plane under him. The strange camera angle, Sonic being able to move in all 8 directions, and the platforming while having to deal with an auto-scrolling screen make it slightly intuitive, but once you get used to it, the stage is definitely fun to an extent. I'm also not a fan of the custom boss at the end. It's cool, but very slow and tedious. Phantom Gadget Zone by Coat Rack was in the works since 2.0 and was actually submitted in an incomplete state. Despite this, it was still fairly well received, but fuck me, it's dark. I hate this shit. Even with my monitor at full brightness, I still can't see shit. I guess you've got to increase the brightness in-game, which makes it somewhat better, but at the cost of washing out the colors. The 2 clear winners for most people were Koopa Garrison Zone by Fawfulfan and Gravity Garden Zone by Dr. Tapeworm. Koopa Garrison was a sequel to Fawfulfan's Pipe Tower Zone, which funnily enough was included in SRB2 2.1 at this point. Both levels were based on the old Mario Koopa Blast stages of the final demo and 2.0 era, but whereas Pipe Towers used the overworld and underworld themes, Koopa Garrison is a level fully taking place in the Bowser's Castle inspired section. Thwomps, lava, flamethrowers, it makes Pipe Towers look like Green Flower Zone with how many hazards there are. It's also pretty long, which complements the whole danger around every corner aspect of its design. It's fairly fun, but also suffers from some of the same issues Pipe Towers does, relatively linear and doesn't really go beyond the standard precarious platforming in terms of gimmicks. On the other hand, Gravity Garden Zone is a much safer and more comfortable romp. Right off the bat, I love the visuals. The combination of Green Flower Zone-esque flora and an Egg Rock Zone themed space station gives this level such a unique feeling, and the anti-gravity was implemented with the intent to make it easier to grasp than the anti-gravity in the second act of Egg Rock. It's really solid. Even if I do still hate anti-gravity, this one is at least more forgiving. Koopa Garrison and Gravity Garden were fairly close for most of the OLDC, but Gravity Garden ultimately won with a 219 score over Koopa Garrison's 202. The multiplayer stuff... Only 5 maps across the match and CTF division, most of which were considered mediocre. The match division was won by Fountain Hill Zone, with its only notable competition being Collapsing Cavern Zone by Fawfulfan, which was an attempt at making a match map that changes its terrain over time. The concept was poorly executed. For CTF, there were 2 maps, Snowy Fortress Zone by Blaster Guy, another generic ice level, and Cancelled Flight Zone by Fawfulfan. Again, it seems like a cool and unique idea, but maybe the concept of what's essentially a first-person shooter map taking place in an airport isn't the best idea from a morality perspective. This was only 5 years after the No Russian controversy. Anyway, it won the division with a score of 14. The last OLDC of 2014 took place across September and October and only had 9 entries. It was still a decent competition, but to see the numbers go down so quickly, especially after 2014 started off so strong, it must have been quite disheartening. The single-player division, despite only consisting of 3 submissions, was quite strong, with even the lowest rated level of the group, Mud Mine Zone, still being considered an okay level. This one also struggles with portions being way too dark, which isn't helped by the sometimes maze-like navigation, but otherwise it's pretty okay. Ring Valley Zone by Fickleheart is also really fun, being less of a conventional level and more of a scavenger hunt where you look for rings to open doors. Some creative mechanical changes to ring loss assures that you'll never really be soft-locked, and the end boss is cool, if a little tedious. The winner of this contest with a 66 score is yet another level that was added to SRB2, the Halloween-themed challenge level, Haunted Heights Zone by Dr. Tapeworm. And there's really not much for me to say. Aside from some minor level design modifications to make the level more challenging in 2.2, there's little in the way of change between its OLDC debut and its introduction into the campaign. It's still a great level. The match division was fairly cut and dry with how voting worked for its 3 submissions. Moonlit Island by Sphere was the clear winner of the division, praised for its tight layout and nice visuals. Dark Mansion Zone by Blaster got 2nd place. Good concept and good visuals ruined by bad ring placement and being way too dark. And then there's Burning Oak Zone by Brawl. It sucks. It sucks in such a way that you have to wonder if it was done on purpose. It's a fire-themed level where there's never-ending rain, the power-up ring's position is completely haphazard, and god this layout sucks ass. Yeah, it's bad, but hey, everyone who voted found it funny, so at least it was good for that. Finally, we had the CTF division, where a relatively close race occurred between Egg Flagshin Zone by Coat Rack and Evil Flower Zone by Zipper, Mascara Snake, Bads, Sphere, Fickleheart, and R543. God damn, a 6-person collaboration, and it ended up winning the division. Both levels were considered solid, but because most of the users who collaborated on the creation of Evil Flower voted and put their creation at the top, it did slightly skew the result in Evil Flower's favor. Following the completion of this contest, the November-December 2014 OLDC was promptly cancelled, once again because of a lack of entries. It seemed that despite the new release, the issues the OLDC had been suffering from for so long were still in full effect, even if the actual levels were getting better. In 2015, the OLDC started back as usual. January-February 2015's OLDC had 6 entries. There was only one map submitted for the match division, Forest Isle by that SRB2 dude, which won by default. The CTF division had 2 maps, Flipside Station Zone by Fickleheart and Thunder Tower Zone by Flipper, which tied and both won with a score of 3. That just leaves the pitifully small single-player division with 4 maps, one of which was disqualified from the competition for not starting immediately when loading a new game. It sucked, so nothing good was lost. That just leaves us with the winner, Quickman 2, which is a totally unique beast acting as a sequel to Quickman from the May-June 2014 OLDC. This one uses similar Mega Man themed gameplay but with a Toho makeover, which I can't really comment on since I've never played Toho, unless you count the true final boss of Sonic Frontiers. The controls have been improved since the first Quickman, it's got better level design and improved enemy AI. The only problem I had is that the opening tells you that you can shoot. The other 2 levels are whatever. Castle Rush Zone by Nux576 is about the most generic thing I've played, like if you took Castle Eggman and stripped it of everything that made it unique and fun. No difficult platforming or expansive level design, just generic platforming for platforming's sake. Sapphire Summit Zone by Savor Dez is okay, it's more based on exploration, but I feel like the whole beach-themed level with wide level design is pretty overdone. There was a lot more that could have been done with this level, and it sticks out as feeling like something that should have come from 2007. Overall, a very weak OLDC, far from the best way to start the year, and it didn't get much better with time. The March-April 2015 OLDC also saw an insufficient amount of entries, so the contest was cancelled and merged with the May-June 2015 contest, resulting in the March-June 2015 OLDC. 4 months of time to create and submit levels left this 4-month spread with 10 entries. For the single-player division, the clear winner was Ghost Battle Zone. It's far from the first boss fight level submitted to the OLDC, but it's easily the best one I've played. The boss is unique. I like the idea of having 2 different battles in one, and it's a pretty fun fight. After damaging the pumpkin monster, it sucks you in its mouth and you've got to fight this ghost for a few rounds before being thrown out. The ghost itself only fires projectiles, but the arena you're fighting it in will also randomly attempt to crush you, so there's more to it than you might think. It's pretty fun. I also enjoyed Flicker Light Zone, even if the darkness gimmick is kinda boring. You're doing a lot of waiting, which causes the level to lack in good flow. I appreciate that for the first time in any of these 2.1 OLDCs, a level uses darkness creatively instead of just using it as an annoyance. Let's see. Eggman Way 7, Quest for Eggman Ways 1 through 4, Revenge of Final Demo. This was created in a collaboration between Zipper and Toaster, and I can only assume it's an attempt to take a short and small level and create a humorous story to tie it together, similar to the Sonic Dumb Venture level from the July-August 2011 OLDC. The difference is, Dumb Venture had a fun set of small level segments, while Eggman Way 7 is just a short and frustrating Metal Sonic race. Emerald Flower Zone by Glaber is just another generic Green Flower Zone Act 2 rehash, and Motherlode Canyon Zone is an unfinished level which plays out like a glorified obstacle course. The Match and CTF divisions really only stood out thanks to Sphere's solid work on Archive Stronghold Zone in Match and Magma Plant Zone in CTF, which won in those respective divisions, while also giving Sphere his 16th and 17th OLDC wins. I especially love how Archive Stronghold uses the Castle Eggman's library textures. It looks wonderful. Otherwise, the divisions were once again incredibly mediocre, and it prompted yet another change in the OLDC's ruling. For the July-August 2015 OLDC, Mystic announced that going forward, the multiplayer divisions would be postponed and future OLDCs would focus entirely on single-player due to the increasingly poor reception of the Match and CTF levels being submitted, which was reflected in the multiplayer selection for the OLDC in July-August 2015. The only positively received map out of both Match and CTF was Aquatic Corridor Zone, an attempt at creating a match map that took place underwater, but most voters felt the idea was ruined by plastering elemental shields all over the place. For single player, I didn't really fall in love with anything here. Flip Goop Station, or as it's fully known, Sonic and Knuckles Robo Blast 2 and Knuckles featuring Knuckles and Knuckles Flip Goop Station demo by Lat, is fine, but it doesn't really have an interesting layout and it becomes way too confusing. I really did not like Sacred Woodland. The invisible platforms are a good idea, but ruined by the dark environment and the fact that placing a single ring monitor doesn't really do a good job of educating the player on how much room you have to land on a platform. Scarlet Lake by Zipper I rather enjoyed. Just like their previous level Quickman 2, it's a giant reference to Toho, which I don't mind since the music is pretty excellent and the layout is fun. Technology Station Zone by XEFA Game is a generic and forgettable platforming romp, and Nikoshi and Redacted's Proud Sky Zone is a joke level with no joke. 20-second 2D mode throwaway. What's the point? Flipgoop Station won the division with a score of 89. So yeah, not a great selection, and the utter lack of attention it received during voting was easy to see. Ever since the OLDC had returned in early 2014, the number of people voting had perpetually decreased, and it ultimately resulted in Mystic deciding to forego his initial decision of pausing the multiplayer divisions. Instead, he simply postponed the OLDC. After so many months of interruptions during its 12-year run, the OLDC had finally and firmly been cancelled. And so, time went on, and the SRB2 community progressed as normal without the OLDC running. In 2018, Sonic Team Jr. began teasing the next version of SRB2, and in December 2019, it was released as version 2.2. This new release once again sparked a lot of interest in the community thanks to a slew of new additions. It was a monumental time for the community, and not long into the next year, 2020, something big happened. Something that many had anticipated and others hadn't. After a solid 4.5 years of being out of commission, the official level design contest returned. Announced on July 19, 2020, it caused a large amount of excitement within the community. From newcomers to community veterans who had been participating since the final demo days, everyone was hyped to see the community getting a chance to share their talents and compete for trophy icons in the forum. So with the OLDC coming back, a large amount of format changes followed suit. First of all, the contest was no longer going to take place every 2 months. Originally, the new 2.2 version of the OLDC was intended to take place every 3 months, making for 4 contests throughout the year. After 2 contests in 2020, the contest was changed to have 2 rounds, with each taking place over 6 months. This was to account for the higher quality expectations of levels in 2.2, ensuring that people had as much time to polish their levels. Considering the amount of rushed and unfinished levels that had been submitted back when the OLDC was bi-monthly, this was a smart decision. For single-player levels, the format was completely changed. Previously, the WAD files for levels would be released individually, and you'd have to play them all separately, but starting with the 2020 OLDCs, levels were compiled into a single add-on. Loading this add-on into the game would replace the main single-player campaign levels with one stage that acts as a hub, allowing you to access every single-player OLDC submission in one place, and this is a godsend. Not only does it make playing these levels much easier for net games with multiple people, but it's so much easier to play all the levels in one session of the game instead of booting up the game, loading one level, playing it, quitting out, starting the game up again, and then loading in another OLDC level. It kinda got fucking old after a bit, so I appreciate the more efficient experience. The voting system used in this hub was taken from the amazing collaborative SRB2 Sugoi level pack. Also new is the addition of multiple new divisions. In addition to the returning single-player, match, and capture the flag division, the circuit division, previously having been retired after 2011 by Mystic, was brought back, and there are 3 new divisions never before seen in the OLDC. Control Point / Diamond in the Rough, Arena, and Battle Capture the Flag. These divisions were created to accommodate for levels based on the SRB2 Battle mod, which creates multiple new competitive multiplayer modes. This was the first time custom game types were allowed in the OLDC, and with this and the buzz around 2.2 and the return of the OLDC in general, the first OLDC of 2020 fucking exploded with content. 41 entries were collected in total, the most in the entire history of the OLDC. This is insane, and the craziest part is, over half of the selection was comprised of single-player stages. This division had 21 submissions, and believe me, it makes the new single-player OLDC format even more appreciable. Oh, and also, the OLDC was now hosted by Sonic Team Jr. member 7th Sentinel, as opposed to Mystic or Prime 2.0. So, with all this new content, I suppose the best way to do it is just to jump right in. Now obviously, talking about every single player level in detail would be fucking lunacy, so I'll bring up the highlights of the division, good or bad. Oasis Palace Zone by So Turo is a level that, much like Haunted Heights and Frozen Hillside before their addition to the game, wouldn't seem out of place in the SRB2 campaign. It's got expansive level design, great use of pre-existing gimmicks and enemies from Arid Canyon Zone, and god, it looks amazing. This is, I think, the biggest improvement that came with the 2.2 era of the OLDC. The massive visual facelift the entirety of the campaign got in 2.2 allows for stages in the OLDC to look so much better, assuming they don't already use custom textures. It's such a massive breath of fresh air, especially to someone playing these levels one by one. Wild West Zone Act 2. I don't remember Act 1, but this is a pretty fun level that uses many similar gimmicks from Oasis Palace to different effect. I suppose that checks, considering the fact that they both ended up competing closely for the top spot alongside a few other great levels. Metallic Madness Zone is based on the Sonic CD level of the same name and created by Othias and Kana. It was almost disqualified due to file problems, but it managed to slip through at the end, and what a relief. Not only is it beautiful and filled with wide and expansive level design, it also has many cool uses of slopes, and the music is great. Rustic Templar Zone by MK.exe is another level that scored highly. Every level I've mentioned so far has gotten over 700 points, and it's pretty fun. I appreciate that it's sort of another desert level like Wild West, but doesn't pull a lot of obstacles or ideas from Arid Canyon Zone. One of the most interesting levels of the division was Snowflake Ridge Zone. Similar to the Quickman levels made by Zipper in the 2.1 era, it modifies the game to resemble that of another platformer, but this one mimics the Spyro series. I think it's a novel concept, but I do wish there was an easier way to see the amount of gems you've collected, unless I'm missing something. One level which had a great concept that was mishandled was Myriad Memories by Manami Fire, which is based around teleporting to rooms and solving puzzles. The presentation and these pulleys reminds me of Sonic Heroes, but unfortunately, just like Sonic Heroes, this level is pretty damn long and uninteresting. Gargoyle puzzles were a cool concept maybe 8 years ago, but in this 2.2 era, they feel pretty antiquated. Also, one of the rooms requires you to jump into a group of springs that is hidden by darkness. I only found out about it after being stuck in the room for about 3 minutes and deciding on a whim to just jump at a wall that the springs were on. Heroes Hall by Zaxel is another level that suffers in needless length. My playthrough clocked in at just under 14 minutes. It's so goddamn long. And while this by itself isn't a major problem, the level is just a glorified button hunt a la the pre-2.0 version of Castle Eggman Zone, so it's also pretty boring. Valley Fall Zone is a level that disappointed me immensely. I heard the Rystar music and was immediately ready to give this level props, until I found myself in a giant maze that was impossible to navigate. It also takes place underwater. No thank you. The lowest scoring level of the entire division was Wasif Boom's Hyper Tower Zone. This is such a confusing level, and frankly, I was hoping this kind of incompetent and lazy design is something that would have been left behind in 2.0. There's sections that I'm not even sure how the creator of the map playtested it, because it just seems like they're impossible to navigate without Tails or Knuckles. The winner of the division was Oasis Palace Zone with a score of 757. For the numerous multiplayer divisions, only CTF was left out, so there's a lot to unpack here. The match division only consisted of 3 maps, but they were all well received for the most part. I really loved how beautiful Crystalline Heights by Revan is. It looks so amazing, and the design is large and varied. Disco Town Zone is also really detailed. Despite how many city levels I've seen in the OLDC, this is one of the few that stands out and feels really well made. I love the chili dog stands, and the addition of cars is clever. Kinda reminds me of Las Venturas from San Andreas. Having been previously retired due to a consistently low turnout, I wasn't expecting great things from the circuit selection, and I wasn't exactly impressed. At the very least, Hydro Wing Zone, the winner of the division by JAB Sphere 94, is a cool concept, and it looks really good. Okay, so now for the SRB2 Battle divisions. SRB2 Battle is similar in concept to the existing Ring Slinger multiplayer modes, but instead of slinging rings, every character has unique combat abilities and stats. The 3 modes result in a variety of map designs, and since I've never played SRB2 Battle, much to my shame, I have even less to say about these than the match and CTF levels as far as gameplay goes, but the visuals are still worth mentioning. The only issue I have is that for the Battle mod, it's a separate add-on, so of course you have to load it in. But if you happen to load in the OLDC battle stages first and then the mod, they won't appear. Kind of irritating if you don't know. Anyway, for the Control Point division, I'll not abbreviate that one for obvious reasons. There were 3 maps. Glimmer Gulch was the obvious winner of the division. Solid layout, based on Arid Canyon Zone, but doesn't stand out compared to the other 2. First is Peach's Castle by AC Striker, which is based on the courtyard area of Peach's Castle from Super Mario 64. I like the idea, but the level is kind of ugly. The lack of textures on the castle just makes everything look like an unfinished tech demo. Finally, SSN's Picnic by Zoltan is a joke level apparently based on a Discord call. It takes place on a giant table with old pre-2.2 SRB2 art in the background, which is hilariously charming. The Battle CTF, I'll refer to this as the BCTF division, had 4 maps. In comparison to normal CTF maps, they're not terribly different, but they are missing staples of CTF level design like team rings and power-up rings. All the BCTF levels look great, which is also nice. The winner of the division was Serene Shore Zone by Krabs. Finally, Arena, which is supposed to just be a giant slobber knocker where you beat the hell out of your opponent. The arena maps are all very small and feel very cramped, which I guess is to make sure people are always fighting and not running away. The top 2 maps of the division for Arena, Gravity Station Zone and Hidden Chamber Zone, were both made by Krabs, but Gravity Station Zone won the division with a 44. I also liked the 3rd place submission, Mountainous Saloon, just because the idea of a fight breaking out in a small bar like this is hilarious and cute. There is also Grassy Clearing Zone by Apollyon, which is based on Shovel Knight and is the only 2D mode arena map here. So after 5 years, was the wait worth it for this OLDC? Absolutely. The changes to the format made things easier for competitors and voters alike. The higher amount of divisions created more variety. The single player division here was one of the strongest in the history of the OLDC, and it was clear the community was more energized than ever. The OLDC just needed a small break and it was back in full force. The second OLDC of 2020 took place in autumn and had about half the entries across all 7 divisions, including no match and CTF levels and also no control point levels. The circuit division was only 2 maps, neither of which were voted on that much, but I enjoyed the winning map, Electric Avenue by Joe Mustard. It's got excellent flow and it's very fun to speed through, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it would give Sonic and Metal Sonic an overwhelming advantage. The Arena division and the BCTF division were both won by the same person, Krabs. GFZFLR01 zone won BCTF with a 30, and Stupid Face Stabber zone won the Arena division with an 11. So single player is the hero, and this is yet another very strong single player division. Let's start with the winner. Well, the winner for me anyway. It ranked in 4th place overall, but Pagoda Park Zone is a masterpiece. I thoroughly enjoyed this level. It starts in a beautiful outdoors area with cel-shaded environments that reminds me of Okami, but transitions into a full-on Sonic Colors love letter. The Aquarium Park visuals just fill me with happy nostalgia, and the stage is very fun to play. It also 100% lacks in 2D, unlike Sonic Colors, so I appreciate that. I also liked Overgrown Heights Zone Act 2. The first act was in the summer 2020 OLDC, but the second act improves on the first with some better level design, even if it is still kinda ugly in regards to lighting. Hakiryu Dojo by Zaxel is a very interesting concept, taking place in a dojo, but it's weighed down by many flaws. It's pretty long and monotonous, and I hate areas where you're required to beat a large portion of enemies to proceed. The custom boss at the end is also a pain in the ass. Dark Marsh, another low-ranking level, is a really weird idea. I assume it's meant to take place in the swamp, but there's some weird areas that kinda give me pirate ship vibes. I hate the instant kill pits, I hate the odd layout, and the goalpost placement being so fucking weird caused me to extend the time I spent here by about 2.5 minutes. The winner of the division was Foliage Furnace Zone by Othias and Kana with a 705. This level is pretty fun. I love how it looks and the layout is simple but fun. However, I still preferred Pagoda Park Zone overall. 2021 was the first year to switch from the proposed seasonal schedule 2020 started with to the 6-month 2-round format that the OLDC currently runs with. By this point in the OLDC, single player had become the most popular division by far, with the majority of submissions being single player levels. Only Match and BCTF received any entries for the first round of the 2021 OLDC. BCTF only had 2 entries, and voting was apparently minimal since the point margin was fucking pathetic. Metallic Madness Zone by Rubber Jig and Apollyon won the division over Oiled Wasteland by Infernor. The former scored a 4 while the latter scored a 3. For Match, there were 6, 2 of which were submitted by Glaber. If you've been watching and paying attention, you're probably just as shocked as I am to see Glaber continuing to submit maps to the OLDC 15 years after their debut on the scene. Nothing they created scored particularly high, but it's nice to see such an old community member still showing up on the submission list. The winner of the Match division was Uncharted Badlands Zone by MK.exe. For single player, well, first off, the OLDC selection hub was improved by means of giving players the ability to switch characters within the hub itself, rather than having to exit out and create another save file. As usual, there's some real good stuff here. Lava Temple by Vixuin started by pissing me off. There's a lot of irritating enemies in a level packed with pretty tight corridors, and the main gimmick of the level, which is using the rollout rock from Red Volcano Zone to press buttons and open doors, is pretty unintuitive. It begins tedious, but by the end, it picks up to a tremendous extent. The creativity in many of the puzzles and challenges is seriously off the chains, and even though the beginning is a bit sluggish and unintuitive, it picks up to a fantastic degree in the later portions of the stage. It's very fun. The absolute highlight of the division is, surprisingly, a 2D mode level. It also begins with about 2 minutes of disclaimers, which I can only guess has something to do with the unique camera that presents itself throughout the entire stage. It reminds me of Clock Tower Zone from the May-June 2014 OLDC, but unlike this level, it doesn't make me feel nauseous. I absolutely loved every second of this level. The platforming challenges are incredibly unique and fun, and the flow is excellent, consistently transitioning between platforming and just being able to fucking speed through everything. The perspective-based platforming is something that's pretty fresh, and frankly, I think it's very fun. About the only problem this level had for me was the very glitchy visuals, but it's so enjoyable to play through that I can forgive it just on that basis alone. I liked Mercury Mine Zone by Rexeljet. Definitely not as unique as Anti-Station, but it's solid, and the idea of liquid that drains your rings is also pretty unique. Koopa Castle Zone by Glaber is an attempt to make a Bowser's Castle level, akin to Koopa Garrison Zone from the July-August 2014 OLDC. A lot of throwbacks to 2014. Now, are they intentional? Probably not, but who knows. Koopa Castle is already a massive improvement over most of Glaber's work for the decent level design and visuals, but it gets ruined by the random boss fight at the end. For whatever reason, the level ends with a boss fight against Black Eggman, the final boss of the vanilla SRB2 campaign. Why? I don't understand the relevance of slapping this fight at the end of this level. It's cool you can fight him with fire flowers, but it's so abrupt and it fucks up the pace. Music Mash Zone by Wasif Booms has a really good idea, taking place across a number of musical instruments, but the level design is horrid. It's full of many vague dead ends that don't give you any ideas on how to get past the rooms, and it just isn't that fun to play. The level that pissed me off the most was Blizzard Bastion Zone by Phil J. Foe. This one separates itself from all the other ice levels I played by being unreasonably difficult. There's so many instances of unforgiving level design. You'll figure out how to get past the many traps this level lays after maybe 2 or 3 deaths, but it's just not a fun experience overall. Even though it placed second in the division, I wasn't very fond of Falcon Emissary Zone by Infernor. The cool theme and visuals get ruined by a lot of camera issues and some pretty idiotic level design choices. The clear winner of the whole thing with a score of 912, beating Falcon Emissary Zone by over 130 points, was Hollow Hill Zone, created by Othias, Inazuma, and Spectorius. This level blows the others out of the water in terms of sheer presentation. The ambient lighting and the background decorations truly gives it a very somber and haunting atmosphere, and it manages to be difficult and long just like Falcon Emissary, while being much more fair and fun. It's an excellent level, but personally I'd still give the crown to Anti-Station Zone, which ranked in 3rd place. The second round of the 2021 OLDC had slightly more entries, but with the same amount of multiplayer submissions this time. Battle CTF sat out this time in favor of the standard SRB2 Capture the Flag, which is good because it's the first time I get to talk about it in the 2.2 era of the OLDC. Between the 3 CTF levels, Colorful Tower Zone by Mikhail Blur won pretty definitively with a score of 10. Compared to its competition, Boiling Crater Zone and yet another Castle Eggman Zone 2 knockoff, it's the clear winner with its creative theme that's actually shared with the winner of the single-player division, and its solid layout. Boiling Crater's use of the rollout rock for CTF is astoundingly annoying, and another Castle Eggman Zone 2 knockoff lags like nothing else. For match, the winner was Marble Acropolis Zone by Diego with a score of 5. Funnily enough, its only competition, Yeehaw Village Zone by Voidy2246, scored a 0, meaning no one voted for it over Marble Acropolis. The Arena division was won by Misty Garden Zone, created by Infernor. I think this was overall a fairly weak selection of single-player stages. Compared to the first round, there weren't a lot of stages I really loved, and many of the highest scoring stages had things that upset or confused me. The winner of the division, Brick Busted Zone by Mikhail Blur, shares the same toy castle theme as his winning CTF map, Colorful Towers Zone. It's absolutely massive in regards to its level design, and it's damn challenging. I love the visuals, and the concept is very fresh. Truthfully, I don't really have any major issues with the level, but I didn't fall in love with it like I did with some others. Lucid Landscape Zone, which was made by Othias and landed in 2nd place, is also pretty good. Love the visuals, but I can't help but feel that the stage flipping gimmick is a bit underused. I think Invasion Zone is a neat concept and ends with a custom boss, which is a pain in the ass. The enemies you encounter are also a major pain, but it's really fun speeding through some of those chase sections. Twins Are OK's Command Facility Zone is solid and has a cool idea with the ambiguous yellow liquid that drains your rings. Kinda wish it didn't end with the first boss randomly though. Really, there was nothing terribly bad here, but nothing great either. The standouts for me were Follow Your Rainbow and Something Zone. Follow Your Rainbow is probably the strangest level I've played since Sonic Dumb Venture. Seriously, this shit is just weird. It starts off as a recreation of City Escape Zone from Sonic Adventure 2 and quickly transitions into... I don't even know, what the fuck is going on? The music gives me major Suffering Doomed Shadow Show vibes, and zooming through this mall is just weird. Seriously, what the hell? Something Zone is, I assume, another joke level. It uses 2D mode with a dynamic camera similar to Anti-Station Zone from round 1, but it's not as fun. The main draw is that the visuals cycle between the levels from the main SRB2 campaign, from Green Flower Zone all the way to Egg Rock Zone. Problem is, the level chunks are pretty small, and the map as a whole is not particularly memorable. Round 1 of the OLDC for 2021 was definitely the highlight, but this was a strong year as a whole. The latest OLDC, taking place over the course of the previous year, 2022, across 2 rounds. Round 1 had 19 submissions in total, although the SRB2 wiki has a typo and listed as 29. It's a pretty big drop from the second round of the OLDC in 2021, which had 28 submissions as a whole, and the multiplayer divisions were once again left in the dust. We only have 2 CTF maps and 3 BCTF maps. The BCTF division notably features Quartz Quadrant Zone by Penne Boy, which won and was yet another multiplayer map based on a Sonic CD level, akin to the BCTF map Metallic Madness Zone from the first round of the 2021 OLDC. The regular CTF division was won by Blast 98 and their map Aquatic Territories, which got a score of 7. The single-player stuff was fairly good this time around, and also pretty unique. Despite placing very low, 2 of my favorite levels were Hell Coaster Zone Act 1 by Voidy2246 and Egg Machine Zone by Nick Is 2002. Now both these stages undeniably have their issues. Hellcoaster's lava being instant kill is really obnoxious, and the level can feel unpolished in many areas, but I love the obstacle course thematic. The 2D sections are fun, and the minecarts are too, while also arguably being more interesting in regards to the obstacles than the minecarts in Arid Canyon Zone Act 2. Egg Machine Zone is really long, and it has some pretty unforgiving sequences like this fucking maze of spike balls at the end, but the concept is pretty unique. There's liquid that flips the gravity, making for some wildly involved and varied platforming, and even though the level sort of has the issues of being another button hunting stage, the actual button hunting is a lot more involved than a few others. The ending sequence is also delightfully dynamic, and overall, the level is just really enjoyable outside of a few hiccups. Spiral Hill Pizza Zone by Roger, ranked in 3rd, and it's a funny concept. It takes place in this overly detailed town and has you delivering pizzas throughout. It's a cute idea, but it's got a few issues, least of all being how goddamn laggy it is. The town itself is filled with some irritating areas, like a river that's not easy to escape and random springs on this hill, but the worst part is, you have a time limit. It kinda sullies the joke when I'm more annoyed than entertained. Festung Odor So by The Shadow is another odd one, even if you ignore the peculiar name. It starts off normal, but then it just turns into another glorified Switch level where you hunt for buttons, with a time limit. What a pain. Bitter Brink Zone got high marks from me right off the bat for being a blatant homage to Cool Edge from Sonic Unleashed, and I was hoping for a level on par with Pagoda Park from the autumn 2020 OLDC. Unfortunately, the level kind of blows. Even though it's got the excellent music, the actual level design is very uneven and the 2D sections feel unmaneuverable. Also, the bobsled section is a cool idea, but the controls and the execution are, as a whole, pretty poor. The winner of the division was Foliage Furnace Zone Act 2 by Othias, Kana, and Spectorius. Act 1 of Foliage Furnace previously won the Autumn 2021 single-player division, and Act 2 continues its strong points with excellent visuals, great level design, and a new gimmick in the form of these barrels. The barrels are slightly awkward due to the camera, but overall they make for a very fun mechanic. These 3 stages, Quartz Quadrant Zone, Aquatic Territory Zone, and Foliage Furnace Zone Act 2, were the final contest winners for the OLDC, because following the completion of the first round in 2022, the OLDC was cancelled. Why is that? Was it because of a lack of entrants again? Well, no. See, calling it a cancellation is a bit misleading. Rather than being cancelled yet again, the OLDC was merely rebranded. Starting from the second round of 2022, the original level design contest would no longer be a contest. The OLDC was now the original level design Collab. The premise was similar. People would create stages for the divisions and share them, but now there was no voting, no competition, no winners. Simply a celebration of the community's mapping talents. Thus, after running for almost 20 years, albeit with a few interruptions and complications, the original level design contest had, for the final time, come to an end, and what a way to end it. The first original level design Collab, which was considered the second round of the OLDC for 2022 despite not being a contest, had 15 entries, and I wonder if the low number of entrants compared to 2020 and 2021 was what sparked the decision to remove the competition aspect. I like the decision. It's nice to no longer have to worry about voting or creating a level that could win, and it seemed like a better way to deal with the lack of entries than just cancelling the whole thing again. Besides, even with the small number of submissions, round 2 of the 2022 OLDC actually had decent variety, with 5 out of the 7 divisions having at least one submission. I have to admit, even though they're not competing this time, the single-player division for this collab is very strong. Obviously, since there's no competition, I have no rankings to follow, but I can still list off the highlights. For me, the winner by means of sheer weirdness was Egg TV Network by Roger, channeling the bizarre nature of their last OLDC submission, Follow Your Rainbow. This one is just as weird, but with a more cohesive theme throughout. The idea of an Eggman-themed TV studio is hilarious, and the level is a joy to play through. I love Roger's continued use of these weird-ass custom enemies that remind me of Sonic shorts. Creepy Crypt was made by the same person who made Lava Temple from the first round of the 2021 OLDC. It's okay, but I think Lava Temple was more fun and inventive. This one seems a lot less creative and not as challenging. Green's Hill Zone by Roy Curbs is a cute little romp with enemies and environments inspired by Kirby. It's a bit awkward seeing enemies from the vanilla SRB2 campaign combined with ones from Kirby, but I think the level makes up for it with some fun sections and a neat mini-boss. Speed Highway Zone by Lucas Lix Oso is a recreation of Speed Highway from Sonic Adventure, and it works surprisingly well. This is quite a lovingly made stage, and I love how it takes inspiration from every aspect of the original Speed Highway. The SRB2 version of the section where you run down the skyscraper is really neat too. I also really liked Lost Fortress Zone by EAJS, but the last section feels a bit too big for its own good. A lot of the level is pretty challenging and fun, but this part just feels huge for the sake of it. Crash Course Zone by Voidy2246 has you riding on extreme gear a la Sonic Riders. That's really all that stands out about it. The actual level is pretty empty and boring. So that was the final OLDC as of now, and the inaugural edition of the collaboration. The OLDC for 2023 is currently accepting submissions with a few new rules, so I'm excited to see how that turns out. Will it have even more submissions? What new gimmicks and themes will show their heads? Only time will tell, but the future of the original Level Design collab is looking quite bright. So that's the end of this long journey. It was not easy playing through all 1001 OLDC submissions over the past 20 years, but fuck was it fun. This community is full of so much creativity and talent, and I hope the future OLDCs will allow even more people to showcase that. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it to the end, thank you for tuning in and checking out this deep dive into one of the most popular events of the Sonic Robo Blast 2 community. If you'd like to see more SRB2 videos in the future, leave a like and comment letting me know. Also make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to keep up with my content. Have a good night, and please, take care.